All right, welcome back after lunch, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a full program this afternoon, so we'll go ahead and start it up. We're going to be treated to some beautiful drone footage and the significance of the landscapes that Kevin's recorded with his drone. So here's Dr. Kevin Horton.
I was reminded that I had heart surgery 3 months ago, and so I have to be a little more cautious. And who reminded me was my heart. So I'm going to sit down for a little bit. We'll see how that goes. What I'm about to show you was, I don't know how to say this. What I'm going to show you was not intentional. It's kind of like the discovery of penicillin. You know, they weren't looking for penicillin. It just was something that's contaminated on their petri dish. Well, this was just something I got into because I saw one place where I wanted to film with a drone, and so I thought, well, if we could get a drone, I saw what they could do, that would be really cool because nobody's done this. And then all of a sudden I started droning other places and seeing things and going, wow. So this is really, my wife will tell you it this way. She says, yes, Kevin, you want to stop and drone that, I know. But we're not going to right now. So I kind of reserved the drone trips for when I got somebody who's patient, who hasn't been with me too long. All right, I have to come up with a better name, but that's as good as it gets. Doc's Drone says otherwise. Watch this little clip. Sound coming?
It should be. It's on your end.
Well, there's just music, so just watch. Don't know what happened to it, but. Did you read that last one? Yeah, that's kind of the world. But this is the one, remember I told you about Francis Collins. This is his group, and this is what they say on their webpage. This is a Christian group. The scientific and historical evidence is now clear. There never has been a global flood that covered the entire earth. It's on their webpage, well, a couple weeks ago. And I've seen it for a year or so now. That is their firm belief. And then I like to follow it up with this, I say otherwise. And I'm going to show you stuff that you're just going to go, wow, wow. But here we got to start with this. What is the issue here? And by the way, tomorrow morning, both services I'll be preaching here, and we're going to take this a little further because we're going to look at the New Testament in terms of this very issue of Noah's flood. So we'll see that tomorrow morning at either service. You'd be welcome. And the pastor says, please come. If you don't usually go there, we'd love to see you. The issue here is not Noah's flood, it's deep time. Deep time is necessary for what? For evolution to occur versus a young earth. That's the issue. And if we look at it rightly, if we look at the Grand Canyon, and can you see that little bracket there? With a little a, and this is hypothetical, but it really does present a pretty accurate scenario. If you look at it from a deep time perspective, those rock layers within that area might represent 3 million years of slow erosion, deposition, and other events happening to lay down those layers. If you look at it from a young Earth point of view, it's 1 week flood surge. Do you see the difference? That's huge difference, a way of looking at the same data. Now let's take it a little further. If you believe that the Bible is trustworthy and the flood of Noah was an actual event, then these layers were laid down during the flood of Noah. All right, so that's the key here in understanding what's going on. Now, let's just see how you've been trained. Take a look at this canyon. I took this picture out in eastern Washington State, I think it was 2 years ago. And here's the question I have for you, and just answer it as you might think to answer it. How many years did it take to cut that canyon? And here's the answer. I used to do this at county fairs. I'd grab people and say, how many years do you think it took to cut this canyon? And they would come up with 100,000, a million, whatever. I'd flip it over 3 days. Now, one of two things happened. Either they would turn around and go, the guy's nuts, or they would stare at me. And then I'd say, no, come here, really, this really actually happened. And we know that to be true. We actually know. Now, I could have an error in here. It could have been 4 days, all right? So just know that. It could have been 4 days. Now, I'm looking down the canyon this way, and I turn this way, take a picture of this beautiful falls, Palouse Falls, and this is a state park in Washington State. And I noticed something when I was looking at this falls. And by the way, our family went down and swam underneath, not under the falls, but down in that little pond down there in the fall one time. It was beautiful, but eerie, because you know if you got under there, you could get nailed and drowned, so we had to stay away from it. But look at that thing. Isn't that interesting? And by the way, we know this was cut in 3 days. Look what's there. Let's zoom in on that. Look at that thing. And then look at those little spicules, those little, whatever, I don't know what you want to call it. How long do you imagine those projectiles would last? How many millions of years do you think those would stay up there? Not really. In fact, I was driving up from Scotts Bluff, or near Scotts Bluff, and there was one of those things sticking up on the side of a hill, big one. And I told Jim, I said, Jim, look at the clock tower. And he says, what do you mean clock tower? Well, I said, that's a clock. That can't last that many years, so it's a clock telling us there was a flood here. All right, so think of that way as we go through this, because this flood was about 3,000 years ago. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And it's called the Lake Missoula flood. Now remember, I live 50 miles south of Missoula, Montana. Jim lives about 25 miles north of Missoula. So that's kind of a hub of shopping for us and a lot of activities. The Lake Missoula flood is a very interesting story. How many have heard of it? Okay, a few of you have. I want to give you the history of this because this is quite fascinating. I want to introduce you to J. Harlan Bretz. By the way, his first name is J with the letter J. That's his first name. It was just a J, not J-A-Y. And J. Harlan Bretz was a school teacher out in Seattle, Washington, about 1910. And he taught a kind of earth science course with his students there. It included geomorphology, which is basically topography, looking at the landscape and how they might have formed. And so he was teaching these classes, and about that time, the first U.S. Geological Survey topographical maps for Washington State came out. And he was looking them over, and here's one of the original maps that he would have seen, and he noticed some of these great big canyon areas. If you look over here, you can see this, and by the way, we're going to fly over that in a little bit, and this deep canyon coming down here to the Columbia River Gorge. And he started going, what is all this? And in fact, there are many more canyons out in that area. And so he started spending his summers out there, and he'd even take some of his students for week trips and 2-week trips out into central Washington State. And anyways, one of the things he discovered was a 3-mile wide waterfall in a desert with no water. Okay? And you say, what am I talking about? Well, this was a waterfall, and it has deep plunge pools below the rim where the water plunged down and cut these pools. They're still there, and there's fishermen down in there right now when I took this. But I also noticed one other thing, and that's this big kind of mountainous thing left out there in the middle. And here's a picture of it. I went down below and looked at it, and look at that thing. That thing's hundreds of feet high, and it's just sitting out there. We call those erosional remnants. I want to back you up and take a look at that now, and you can see where it is in the box right there. And those are left behind by a flood, and some of them actually point the direction of the water flow. And this one does. It points the direction the water flowed during the Lake Missoula flood. And you're wondering, when was this? Well, I'll tell you, so hang on. But J. Harlan Bretz is out there studying this stuff, and he knows there was a massive flood. It becomes very clear to him. And so he starts writing this up. In 1927, he's written up numerous articles on what he called the Spokane flood. Now, a couple of things about it. He was very good in his studies and very accurate in what he did. But he had no idea where the water came from, and frankly didn't care. He just figured it was sometime in the past, there was a flood, he didn't know where. So, 1927, the Geological Society of Washington, D.C., it convened a special meeting just to deal with Bretts. And they brought in elder geologists to help the young protege. And so the elder geologists were there, and Bretts naively opened up all of his charts and showed all of his information, to which he got what? Total rejection. And at the end they said, Bretts, this is wrong. You're doing this all wrong. This took millions of years to cut these canyons. Go back and recheck your data. Because they said this, what Bretts proposed was too much like a biblical flood. Whoa, what is that? Total prejudice against a biblical view. Isn't that something? Well, while he was, and one of Bretts' problems was he didn't know where the water came from, right? Well, supposedly, now we know that J.D. Pardee was there. He was in the room, a man named J.D. Pardee, and here's a picture of him. And he was a geologist from Missoula, all right, working for the U.S. Geological Survey. Supposedly, he turns to a partner next to him and quietly whispers. He's not going to say it out loud because he's watching what's going to happen to Bretts, all right? And he didn't want to be part of that. He turned and says, I think I know where Bretts' water came from. Now, how did he know? Well, I can show you the evidence. I took this cell phone picture probably 10 years ago with one of those older cell phone cameras. And here it is. I'm at a stoplight in Missoula on a wintry day. You see those lines? They're absolutely parallel. You know, when I grew up in North Dakota, I'd see lines on those on a hill, but they're always going up where the cows go up, you know, or the wind is blowing. These are absolutely parallel. They're actually level. Those are lake lines as the lake goes higher and higher because of a dam downstream. Here's another view. This mountain is here, and I turned over here and took a picture of this one this last year. Look at all those lines going up the side of that mountain. Each one of those represent a lake line as the prevailing winds would blow from west to east, and these are on the east side, and the lapping of the water would cause a line. Then the next year with the spring rains and the snow melting, the lake would go higher. And then it would happen again. That's why there's lines. Almost 1,000 feet of water was above Missoula, Montana. That's a little bit of the story. I'll tell you more. But now we're going to take a stop because this is important. All right, we're going to stop. I'm going to take you on a tour of the Sea of Cortez, which is the armpit of the Baja Peninsula, okay? My son was living in a place down there. He worked in L.A., and he would go down there for his weekend retreats to get out of L.A. I think the Montana got him there, and that's good. I was trying to look for sanity. And I went down there. My wife and I went, and our son and daughter went down there one time and Christmas, about 3 years ago. And Chris said to me, he warned me, he says, now, Dad, when you come down here, it's the weirdest thing. He said, at high tide, you'd think you're at any normal ocean. The water's right up there lapping. But low tide comes, and it's 1 mile to 2 miles of just sand and mud and all these little bumps from the waves. And I said, you got to be kidding. And it was true. That's what you would see when he got to low tide. And you could tear those little ripples all up you wanted to. They would reform on the next tide. As the water comes in and is washing out, it would leave those tidal bumps there, or ripples. All right? And there's just like mile out there. It's the weirdest place in the world. And farther you go up into that armpit, it goes all the way across the Sea of Cortez. It is really an amazing thing. Well, I showed you that because J.D. Pardee not only saw the lap lines, or they call them strand lines, on the mountains in Missoula, and we see them all over the Bitterroot Valley and other places in western Montana, he also saw this in Camas Prairie, Montana. These are water ripples as the water broke from the Lake Missoula Dam, and that's monstrous ripples as the water's running off the side of the mountain. And those ripples are 50 feet high, 500 feet across, crosswise, not length. And notice the direction of flow. You can tell that these ones, if you come down the middle of this, you can see the water's flowing this way. But look over here in the corner. You can see the water flowing another direction. The ripples point the direction of flow. Now, this is why I bought the drone. I wanted to film Camas Prairie. It's just, I've driven by Camas Prairie many times. You don't see it from the ground. You have to get up on the side of the mountain, and then all of a sudden it jumps out at you. So I thought, I need to fly this. Nobody's flown this that I know of. All right, so that's the water. You've seen those little ripples in streams and such. This is massive, 50-foot high ripples caused by water running off. Okay, so what happened? Well, during the Ice Age, a lobe of the ice came down and slammed into the mountain at Sandpoint, Idaho, and built a 23-mile-wide ice dam at Sandpoint, Idaho. And the ice dam was right on the Montana-Idaho line, blocking up the Clark Fork of the Columbia River. It put behind it the glacial Lake Missoula, which had more water than Lake Erie and Ontario put together. And that thing was building up so that at the border, which is 1,000 feet lower than Missoula, there was 2,000 feet of water impounded. Now, J.D. Pardee had seen this, and he had seen this, so he had an idea where the water was. He didn't understand that ice dam yet. That will be coming later. And when that ice dam broke, and by the way, that's what happens. In Iceland, they've studied this because they have this happen all the time. Ice dams build up in the glaciers, a lake builds up behind them, and then they suddenly cataclysmically explode, causing great damage downstream. So they studied it and figured out what happens. The water gets building pressure against that dam and finds minute cracks to start pushing through. Now, as the water molecule passes the ice molecule, the liquid passes the ice, there's friction, and you melt a little bit. And as it keeps going, eventually one day there is a drip that finds itself out the other side, 23 miles away by Sandpoint, Idaho. And then another drip, and then a stream, and then a large stream, and then poof, and an 800-foot-high tidal wave went across Washington State as that lake released in 3 days. And so it crossed like this, across Washington State, and it's called the Washington Scablands. And it's a very interesting place to go if you want to just see really torn up land, and I'll show you in just a little bit. So remember, there's Sandpoint, Idaho, where the dam was, and when that blew, the water went down. You follow the arrows. There's a little gap here. Now that little gap is 2 miles across, but it backed the water up and made a temporary lake. They call it Lake Lewis by Yakima, and then it eventually drained. Got kind of narrowed up here, went up the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and took some of Montana's rocks floating in ice and dropped them throughout the fields in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and then the water washed out to sea, all in a matter of 3 or 4 days. So, what do we have here? We have a model of floods. So I took my drone and said, well, I don't live that far from Washington, and I've been going out there every once in a while. I've made a couple of trips, and just, what do floods do? I'll show you one spot. This is by Spokane. See, there it goes. And notice, by the way, here's kind of an erosional remnant, some other ones. This one's kind of cigar-shaped or pencil-shaped, pointing the direction of the water flow. And these are about 100 feet high. Also notice that there's cliffs, and then the gravel comes down at about a 45-degree angle. And I find that all over the place out there. Hold on a second, that came loose. All right, and notice this kind of conglomerate, which looks like a little mini butte complex, and with channels going through it as we fly the drone around. And as you look out in the distance, you can see many more. It's like this for miles and miles and miles. That's the Washington Scablands. This is right near Spokane, Washington, near the city of Sprague. Okay, Now, we're going to make some geomorphological observations. In other words, what a flood does and leaves behind in terms of the topography, okay? And one is we see erosional remnants, like that one, okay? Little butte-like formations, but some of them are pencil-shaped and point the direction of flow. Now, that's kind of a helpful thing. If you see those, that should be an indication of a flood, okay? Now, there's also another thing that we see out in the scablands of Washington State that they're noted for. Let's take a look at it. I have to wait for the computer to catch up. There we go. Now, you see right away in the foreground is one of those little butte-like formations. But watch as we go further. Look at this little lake coming up. These are called the Pothole Lakes of Washington Scablands. Notice the shape. They're round, almost like somebody cut a circle. The banks come down at a very interesting angle, as if there was a router bit, kind of routed that around with about a 45-degree angle. See how that is? Look at that angle. It's almost kind of a reverse bevel. This is kind of like a round, but it's kind of weird shapes, but they have a rounded edge to them. Look out and see the massive scablands off in the distance there. That's what happened from the Lake Missoula flood when you put 800 feet of water ripping across the landscape. Okay, so another thing we observe from the geomorphology of floods are these pothole lakes. They have that kind of angular base going down the shoreline. It's like a router bit kind of routed it around with a little bit of an angle. It's very interesting. And they're all over the place out there. And they're round like that. Now let's see if we can see this next one. There we go. This is farther in now. These cliffs are no longer 100 feet. These are 600 feet deep. And this is Frenchman Coulee as we're moving into the Columbia Gorge. Notice the erosional remnant right there kind of sticking up like an arrow pointing up. And the cliff walls, those cliff walls are dropping 600 feet. That's not little, that's big. That is big country, and this is huge. This is basalt, so this was volcanic material that came down probably at the end of the flood as the mountains were rising up, and it came across Washington State, and now, years later, the dam breaks and it washes this canal out. Also notice here that above the wall there looks like another little coulee or another little creek bottom that was cut, but it got cut off. Do you see that? It got cut off by waters coming this way. So there was one that was starting to wash down here, and then the bigger flow came this way and washed it and left it. Normally, if this happened slowly, that creek would just erode down to the next level, wouldn't it? But in this case, it was starting to come through, and then the others washed through and left it hanging. It's called a hanging coulee. Coulees, by the way, are flat bottomed, and that's interesting. They tend to be flat bottom, steep cliffs, and then it's flat up on top. And that's a typical coulee of Washington State, and it's a coulee because there's no water flowing in it. So what in the world are they? But that's from the Lake Missoula flood. Massive water coming over the landscape. All right, I showed you that topographical map, and I showed you the Quincy Lake Complex. Here we go, we're gonna fly it. And I was 2.5 miles away because I couldn't get into this area, it was closed, but I was able to fly over it. There are some little those beveled areas back here, but notice what we have here, big plunge pool. This is a huge 600-foot drop. Notice the angle here. It's beveled at a 45-degree angle all the way around this sand embankment that evidently was some kind of turbulence from the waterfall coming over, some kind of water back or something like that. Coming into view is a massive, what would you call that? Erosional remnant. Okay, you getting that? And it's pointing the direction of the flow. Notice the top of it. It's somewhat flat-topped. How does that happen? How does it get flat-topped? Ever seen a butte before? How do they get flat-topped? Okay, so you look at that erosional remnant. This is about a mile from here out to there. And then there's some more of these little pothole lakes. They have a very steep beveled 45-degree angle on them, and there's another plunge pool coming into play in just a minute. This is a big plunge pool from the water coming and dropping down. Notice in the backdrop, everything is flat, like it's been planed down, and then you have this, in the middle of this, you have this great big cliff. I drove by this for years and never knew it was there. You just don't see it because nobody's going to drive over there. But it's 600 feet. I was standing up here looking down on this thing going, whoa, holy smokes. And I looked at this, and there's a little trail down here, and I'm thinking, boy, you get going, you could just keep right on going and fall in the lake. I'm going to show you how big this is. In a minute, you're going to see a bird come into play. Do you see him? Flying right off of that corner. That's a little bird. That's probably a big-sized bird. We're 600 feet. We're probably 1,000 feet at this level above that bird because I'm 400 feet above the surface. And you notice these are semi-round lakes. They got that same beveled look. Here's that erosional remnant going out, pointing the direction of the water flow. All right. So we learned a few more things from the Lake Missoula flood. And that would be plunge pools below the cliffs. That's another characteristic of flood geology. And then we get the long erosional remnants that point the direction of flow, or sometimes they don't. We have planation surfaces above the canyon. Now, what I mean by a planation surface is the surface is flat as if somebody took a planer, like you put a board in a planer and flattens it, gets it all cleaned up. It's like they planed that top surface off. And then, what's interesting, by the way, how did that happen? Well, what we think and what we really have surmised now is that in floods, you think about the 800-foot high tidal wave coming across. And it's going to come and it's just going to keep going. And it's going to spread out and it's going to be rolling across the surface like a planer. And it's going to be cutting it flat. So that's called the sheet flow phase. But the water is going to wane, it's going to start to get less, right? And as it gets less, it's going to start to channel. And it'll follow channels, and then it'll pull more water into it. And now you build a channel, and that's what we saw in Frenchman Coulee. We also saw, which is right here. But then there was enough water flowing through that channel that planed that next level down. Now, how many of you ever noticed creek bottoms where the creek meanders, but the rest of the area is fairly flat, and then it kind of goes up again? Do you see how that is? The Platte River, you can see this where it comes down, and then it's fairly flat. Millions of years of slow erosion should have built a V, but it's flat because it was planed down at another level down. All right? So then the channelized phase does the same thing. It planes, but it has sufficient water to plane down the next level down. Okay, what caused these long, flat top erosional remnants? Now think of this. During the sheet flow phase, it's cleaning the top of everything even, but then the water channelizes, leaving the flat top in that middle remnant as the water goes around it and leaves it behind with a flat top. That explains buttes, doesn't it, in a whole nother way. What about those pothole lakes? Took them a while to figure this one out, but actually as the water would be so turbulent, can you imagine 800-foot tidal wave and all that's going on? Lake Erie in Ontario draining suddenly across the area. They realized it would be turbulent whirlpools that are going on, and when that happens, the air bubbles stretch out, the water molecules develop a bubble space between them and drill out those areas, leaving us that router bit circular lakes. And that's what we learned from the Lake Missoula flood. Now, I'm going to stop there and let everybody go, whew. Any questions right here before we go into the next part? Excellent. All right. We'll go into part two. So that's Lake Missoula, and that gives us a basis for now looking east of the Rockies. Now, what I want to say is you get this, you see the box up here. If we go on this, what should be your left side, Lake Missoula went this way and drained out into the Pacific Ocean. All the water in the box flows what direction? It is flowing east. All right, so it's nothing to do with Lake Missoula flood. That's why I chose that area to fly through. Also, I live there, so it works well. Now, think about floods for a minute. This was drawn by Tass Walker, who is a creationist in Australia. And Michael Ord uses a lot, a good friend of mine from Bozeman, Montana, and I used it with their permission. And we think about floods, and the floods go up, and then they hit a peak, and then they go down, right? I mean, that's what floods do. Well, we think about the flood of Noah then. In the early days, it's going to be rising rapidly, doing great destruction. And then it's going to start to come up to a peak and slow down, which is going to be laying down layers. Laying down the layers that it tore all this stuff up, it's in suspension, it'll start to lay that out during that upper part. And so this is the destruction phase. All the sedimentary layers are being laid down after surges destroy everything. And there's going to be surges. So it's going to come down in groups, the layers, as it surges. Now, as it starts to retreat, so that's the flooding stage, and now it's starting to retreat, the first part is going to be sheet flow. So you have all of that muck and mud and layers of gravel and tore up materials, which are all been rounded by great action, is laid down, mile and 2 miles, 3 miles thick. We're under the ocean. Now the water is starting to rush off as the trenches open up in the ocean and the mountains are rising up. We're still underwater, but water is rushing off the surface, grabbing a lot of that soft muck that's been laid down, and it's now planing it down into a flat landscape with there'll be a little bumps and stuff. And then finally, we get the channelized flow as the mountains are rising up above the water now. Water's got to go around around it. The amount of water is getting lower, and so we start cutting canyons and other things in the channelized flow. That's also where you get canyons, you get plunge pools, erosional remnants, and some of the pothole lakes. Okay? Now with that, let's go see what we see east of the Rockies. I'm going to take you to Chugwater Creek, Wyoming. Anybody know where that is? A couple of you. It's not far across the border. You get to LaGrange, Wyoming. You're just going to go across the top of a planation surface and drop down the other side. And I'm going to show you that. I flew this one Sunday. I was doing a Sunday school at this little church, which is right near where we're going to start this, just below. And the pastor said, I want to take you up on this bluff. So you can run your drone up there, and we'll see what pictures you get. So we had an hour before Sunday school class. We just drove up through this gnarly road, and I ran the drone. And then I put away my drone, and a year later I was reviewing it, and all of a sudden I saw something. Now here we go. We're going to take a look at this Chugwater Creek formation. And I'm going to be flying across the interstate. Notice the planation surface way off in the distance. And then notice that the creek bottom is relatively flat with the creek meandering down a fairly flat area. And then it was right here as I was reviewing, I go, oh my goodness, look what I am seeing. Do you see it down in the bottom there? Water ripples. Do you see that? We flew that 2 days ago. Jim and I had to go, and you fly from this end up, and it's water ripples like that go up for about 2 miles. It's astonishing. Water ripples in Chugwater Creek, Wyoming. There's no water there. There's hardly enough water to make a creek. Look at that creek bottom, semi-flat, and then a planation surface on the top of this and over here. So what do I see? I see a flat bottom creek with steep cliffs. I see water flow ripples. And then I see a planation surface above the cliffs. Have we heard this story before? Yeah, wow. Big, massive amount of water. Where'd that water come from? Now, most of you are familiar with Devil's Tower, which is a strange thing, but it was probably a throat of a volcano that came up, remember, as the mountains are rising up because, well, for whatever reason, the continents stopped moving, and now the land is getting pushed, and the mountains are rising up. That exposes magma to the surface, and the magma is probably pushing up through some of those soft layers in various areas, pushes up through, and then cools. Notice the top of that. It's been planed off. So dirt was all around this. It was all planed off together, and then it channelized around that, leaving that behind. Now, That's cool, but this is in Montana. So it's, this isn't very far from where I live. This is Crown Butte. Look at the rock. Isn't that kind of weird looking rock? How it's got these kind of lines in the cliffs here. You'll see it better in just a second. It is a strange butte, and it's what they call a sill formation, where like if there was a throat of a volcano going up, some of it went out underneath the layers. It separated the layers, and it flowed this way, and then got cold and made that top of that butte. Look at how that thing looks. Isn't that weird? That is just strange. I looked at it from a distance, you couldn't see it, but when you got close, oh my goodness. And the drone really brings that out. Now, you can see the Rocky Mountains off in the distance, all right? That's the direction of flow of all the creeks from the Rocky Mountains. That would have been the direction of flow of the water coming off of as the mountains are rising up during Noah's flood. But on top, it's not the way it should be. The water is flowing backwards. Look at those water channels. They're flowing west. And I saw that with the drone and went, what in the world? What gives there? The water's going this way, and those are flowing backwards. And then I looked at those water channels and go, well, that's kind of weird. They look like they continue on out for miles because it's like you cut the creek off. You know, if you have a creek that just starts, it's narrow, and then it gets wider and wider. But if you cut it halfway through it, you would get a U-shaped edge. Look at the edge here. Well, you can't see it now, but right here, it's kind of U-shaped. I'll show you that more. My question was, how did those water channels form going the opposite direction as water flow? The mountains are rising up. If you follow this down, that's the direction to the mountains. So that's the way the water will be run. Why is the water going that way? And then how did those water channels form? They're deep. They're deep channels. And then I looked at how did they make that kind of U shape at the end? It should be different. And then I thought of the irrigation pond by my house. So I'm going to show you the irrigation pond, or creek, by my house. This is a diversion creek of the Bitterroot River. I'm dropping tennis balls in. Don't worry, I've got kids downstream picking them up. But notice, because it's coming through a culvert, notice the balls on the left. Do you see they're going the opposite direction? That's an eddy, right? Because as the water's coming through there with a jet, it's pushing by, but then there's all of a sudden this pocket of water that's space, and the water gravitates, and so it flows backwards on both sides. On either side, the water is flowing backwards. That is an eddy that happens when there's an obstruction to big flow. All right? Eddies. Those of you who run rivers and different things, float rivers, you know a little bit about that. Eddies are a great place to pull in on a busy river. All right, then I started to realize, wait a minute, this butte is sitting up right near the water level. It's an obstruction like a rock in the creek. The water's going to go around it and eddy back. It's going to do that. And then it's going to shoot backwards and cut those canals. See that? That's my hypothesis, all right? It's only as good as my thinking process is good. But I'm going to move 7 miles away to Cascade Butte. And Cascade Butte, look at these water channels here. And look at them from the side. You see what I'm talking about? How it's like they continued way out there and then they got washed away like a hanging coulee, which is diagnostic of a flood. Oh, wow. Evidence of Noah's flood. Oh, but there isn't any. Biologos tells us there isn't any evidence. Now I'm going to take you out to where I used to hunt deer in North Dakota, right on the North Dakota-Montana border. I lived in Dickinson and grew up there. And so I went out and I wanted to fly Sentinel Butte. And notice it's flat top. It kind of goes more gradual down rather than steep cliffs, although part of it has steep cliffs. Look out in the distance and you'll see what looks like a series of erosional remnants on the top horizon, and they're actually kind of cone-shaped, but they follow the direction of flow. The water is flowing this direction, and it left this flat top butte. Now, why I wanted to fly this is because my high school and college years, I'd go up there every fall with my bow. And me and the mule deer had this agreement. I would get up on the cliffs and I'd fling arrows down at them about 60 yards away. They would just jump around until I got my quiver empty. Then they would run away and I'd go pick it up, and we repeat that. And it was a very safe, fun time. And we all enjoyed it. Nobody got hurt, regretfully. Great white hunter I was. But notice the cliffs. There is a hardened rock on the surface as we fly down closer to the cliffs. And you can see the erosional channels on, and by the way, you see this erosional channel here. There's one just like it on the other side. An erosional channel, all coming directly from the Rocky Mountains and leaving behind a flat-topped butte, just like we saw in Lake Missoula flood. Okay? All right, but I looked at the Madison River Valley. This is profound. Madison River, this is near Bozeman, Montana. Notice this flat planation surface, and then the erosional channels are different. They're unlike the cliffs, they kind of make fingers out. And I was wondering why that is. Then I realized, wait a minute, this happened 400, 500 years before the Lake Missoula flood, and so the material was soft, and so it washed down easier. Look at the Madison River Valley, semi-flat down below, the next level down. Look back at the Madison, look how flat that is. And then you see those erosional channels coming down at an angle. That is typical, and you see the mountains off in the distance. That's the direction of the flow. So the Madison River, we see a valley, we see a planation surface. There. Now I'm going to show you a Google Earth picture next. Anybody venture to say what that green spot is over on the left? I'll give you a hint. That is the farthest east portion of the Rocky Mountains. What is it? Mount Rushmore. Black Hills, okay? Look at that white stuff kind of below it and a little bit off to the side. What is that? Oops, back up. Well, there we go. We can go take a closer look. What is this? That's the Badlands, right? Now, I grew up in North Dakota and I hunted at Sentinel Butte. Between where I live in Dickinson and Sentinel Butte was the North Dakota Badlands. North Dakota Badlands are a canyon. That's all it is. It's a canyon formation from water rushing down. All right? South Dakota Badlands are weird. They're just flat weird. They're not the same at all. It's like somebody just dumped a bunch of mud on the ground and then cut holes in it. Look at where these boxes are. The mud, they're just sitting out there on top of a planation surface. Do you see that? It is the strangest place in the world. And then there's water erosion channels. And there's also, if you can see this line right here, it's like this is from water squirting up from the ground, from pressure of weight of something causing the water pressure to squirt up from underneath it during the flood time. And so I started thinking, how did this get here? Tim Clary helped me understand that. He said all that mud on the top of the mile high or two above Mount Rushmore, as the Rockies are pushing up, and these are the farthest east all by themselves, got washed off dramatically during the earlier stages as it's rising up, and it circulated back and dumped some of the mud right there in make the Badlands, and then got washed through, leaving what we see as the Badlands of South Dakota. Does that make sense? Now, I noticed something else while I was looking at Google Earth, and I thought, that looks familiar. Do you see what I'm looking at the bottom? What are those bumps? That looks like what we saw here. And what's interesting is let me show you what these bumps, which we know are from Lake Missoula, look like from the sky. That's what they look like from Google Earth, and you can see the direction of flow this way, and even something this way. You can see the direction of flow. Take a look at those bumps below the Black Hills. What is that? Sand hills. You know that sand is just dumped on top of a planation surface? Wait a minute. Look at how that looks. Look at how that looks. And you remember how that looks? That's all waterborne. And how do the sand hills get here? By wind? Aren't we told? Here's an interesting little thing when you look at the sand hills. I did some research on it, and what happened, ICR, Institute for Creation Research, was studying water bumps, if you will, versus wind. Water bumps will have a downstream angle of descent of about 24 or less degrees. If it's by wind, it'll often be 30 or more degrees, and it's steeper. Those of us who have ever ridden motorcycles or four-wheelers on sand dunes know that you be careful when you're coming up because that drops fast. It's like 30 degrees or more, but that's from wind. Water, it's much more mellow. Do you know what the steepest angles of descent are on the sand hills? 24 degrees. Most of them are less, just like water. Waterborne. What if during Noah's flood there was water eddying around the Black Hills, and it was eddying and dropped all of this for the Badlands, and then some of the sand got let as the water started to spread out and left you the sand hills of Nebraska. Wow. And that makes more sense when you think about the angle that's coming off of those hills. They are equal to what you would find from waterborne depositions. All right, last big place. It's really fun. The Beartooth Mountains. I love the Beartooths. It's right near Yellowstone Park. And has somebody said they were on the Beartooth Highway. How many people have been on the Beartooth Highway? A few of you have. It's great. This is it right here. It's quite the road, okay? And you're going up the side of that thing. And look at how flat the top of that is. I was up there backpacking 2 years ago, and I was coming out, and I went out this way, and I looked at that top and said, that's a planation surface on the top of a mountain. Isn't that interesting? So I got to get my drone up there. So I did. And here is what the planation surface looks like. Look how flat that is. And you remember Madison River Valley, where the angle, those ravines come off at more of an angle instead of a cliff? Probably because the dirt was softer still, or the mountain was. I'm not sure why. This is dropping 3,000 feet down to the valley below. Look at how plain it is, but also there's all sorts of ravines that are being cut in there. It's somewhat of a planation surface, but it's got more of a rolling nature to it. So we see a planation surface on the top of the Beartooth Mountains at 10,000 feet with nothing above it. There's a couple other layers high of just some peaks, but that is it. I also flew over on the other side, and I looked at these lakes. Do you see anything about these lakes? Look at the shorelines. Looks like the router bit got loose. Do you see that? And they're somewhat rounded. Isn't that interesting? That's cut in solid granite. That's harder than the basalts. And this is and there's more up there. And then I looked at the farthest lake. I'm going, is that a plunge pool lake? It's right below the cliff. I went, whoa. So I see the Beartooths at 10,000 feet. I'm seeing pothole lakes. But I was flying along, and then I saw this. And I don't know if you see what's coming into view yet. First off, in the distance, you see the lakes. But look closer in front of you. Look at this. Look at the water going on this side and this side of this central kind of hump in the middle. You have plunge pool lakes, like the water's coming down like this, coming down like this, running on either side of that erosional remnant. Let me show it to you another way. Do you see the erosional remnant now? Notice it's semi-flat. The flat length, the elevation is just below this ridge and this edge. It's like it kind of went in a downward angle, and it's left there, and you can see water channels on either side of it. The trouble is that's at 10,000 feet. Where'd the water come from? Brett's had a problem, but this is a real problem. Where did the water come from to cut this? How else can you explain an erosional remnant like that at 10,000 feet in solid granite? How do you explain that? That is the best evidence for Noah's flood that I've ever found. And that's right off the highway. You never see it because you aren't flying at the right level to see it. And you can see the plunge pools. Let me show you what I mean by that. Here's the erosional remnant at 10,000 feet. And if we look at it from the side, here's what I think happened. The water flow came down, made two plunge pools, and then flowed on either side of that erosional remnant, and leaving that behind. So we have plunge below, pools below the cliff, and then we're at 10,000 feet. There's no lakes, there's no dams, there's no glaciers that are going to do, glaciers don't cut big canyons like that. They might round them out, but they don't cut them. Where did the water come from? Psalm 104, someone quoted it yesterday. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place you appointed for them. Okay. Everybody with me still? Let's review. Here comes the test. Are you ready for the test? All right, here we go. What do you see now? You have different eyes than you did an hour ago. What are you seeing here? What do you see there? How about there? What do you see there? And better yet, what do you see there? And how long would that little clock last? You see, if we look at Lake Missoula flood and the Frenchman Coulee, notice the cliffs with the 45-degree angle at the base, the steep cliffs, 45-degree angle at the base. Notice the flat planation surface, one level down as it channelizes. Look what you see in Monument Valley. Look at the butte. And think about the little buttes that were formed in Lake Missoula flood. We now have a model to see how these things happen. And then, you remember Palouse? There and there. We look at that and we look at that. Wow, we have a model for the origin of all of this. Do you see it now? You have the eyes to see. Now, here's my last question. Where did all of that dirt go? To the Sea of Cortez. And it makes that mud flat that we see to this day. BioLogos says there's no scientific and historical evidence that there was a flood that covered the entire earth. My drone says otherwise. My drone says otherwise. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yes?
Is it possible for you to go back to the Google Earth shot that you showed of Nebraska and the Sandhills?
No, because I'm in Nebraska and that's it. You guys would want, yeah, sure I would. I'd love to. It's something, now I'm going to tell you, that's my hypothesis, all right? And probably there'd be people here who say, oh, no. But I'll tell you what, I think it's a good possibility. So here we go.
I want to offer you just a little bit of confirmatory data here.
Okay, I'm in favor of that.
I got so excited I had a hard time waiting till you.
Oh, well, why don't you grab that microphone if you're going to do that?
Okay. Let's see if we can figure out here where ashfall fossil beds or bone beds would be.
Yeah, put that on.
Okay, let's see if we can figure out where ashfall fossil beds or bone beds would be. It's straight north from us, so we're...
Tell you what, hold on, let me, I think I've got one that's closer, right there. Okay.
Okay. Well, we're down here in the lower right, or ashfall would be somewhere. Is that the state line that's going east to west?
It's up above, it's that one. That's the state line.
That's the
Here's
state
Chadron.
line. Uh-huh.
Okay. There's your state line. So a little bit of this goes into South Dakota, but notice it's coming right from there. The angle of this, and notice the angle of the flow this way, around the Black Hills, a little bit of angle this way.
So up there where the 12 is, would that be, what town would that be?
Nebraskans help me out, but
Would that be Valentine?
okay, so I worked in the Sandhills right here one summer, just to tell you, I have a little Nebraska blood in me, on a haying crew. I had to throw that in. Okay.
So ashfall is further to the east, we're probably off here a little bit. But the last time I was up there, in May 2018, they had new displays up there that I had never seen before, and I was trying to watch my grandkids with one eye and look at these new displays with the other. But they had a course for what they called the ancestral Platte River, and it's not like what the Platte River is now. It was coming up south of the Sandhills, and it was sweeping down to the south, the southeast. And they were saying that it flowed with the force of 1,000 Niagaras. Think about that for a minute. flowed with the force. Where did all that water come from?
Coming from, yes.
And then they had rocks out in front with a sign saying that these rocks have been tested and they have a chemical signature which indicates that they came from the Black Hills.
Oh, yes. Look at that. Wow, that is great.
It's-
Thank you for that, Dave. Yeah. Question?
Have you been to the Colorado National Monument, which is now it's in Grand Junction, Colorado? You'll find similar structures out there.
Like, you mean the butte types of things or what? Yep. Yeah, you find that all over Arizona, Colorado, and as the Rockies rose up, some of the water went off to the east, but some of it backwashed and went down to the Pacific, and so and that's what really washed out this area, leaving the Monument Valley and all of that. So it's pretty cool, different look at our topography, and it helps you now start to see everything differently than what you have in the past. Yes. And where did it come from? Came from there and piled into that hole. And probably, as he was talking about that on the field trip, Jim and I got pretty excited because we're thinking about there probably was some kind of a little eddy, maybe even, I'm not eddy, but whirlpool event, like our lakes, but on a massive scale. And that cut out that aquifer space and came down, and then it filled in. So you can start to see how this all happens by looking at this from the idea of massive flow water. Massive flow water. Yes?
So then the Scottsbluff National Monument and Chimney Rock and that whole area would be what came from around basically your hypothesis would be what came around the Black Hills then.
Could well have been, but some of it probably came also just straight from the Rockies too. So we had these kind of converging areas that were coming down, I would think, but I don't really know. The biggest part of my hypothesis, let's see if I can get back there, would be, and it's based upon what I saw. I showed you those arrows. Where'd it go? Right in here. See if we can get that one to go. All right, if we look back at this one, why I put the arrows like that, because that's the direction that the ripples are pointing. We learned that from Lake Missoula, didn't we? And then I put this other arrow this way because these are coming this way. There's a change in angle right in here. You can't see it as well on this picture, but you can look. When you can look at Google Earth, you'll see it changes in angle, and the thing that's in the way is the Black Hills. So that's my. Well, I didn't get this taped on well, but that's my hypothesis. Yeah.
We just hiked Fort Robinson State Park, Shadron State Park, and the buttes that are up there would fit with a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Coastal Geologic Park that's up there looks a lot like the Badlands.
It does. Isn't it amazing? It's amazing. You start to see it everywhere. Once you have an eye for this, now what's going to happen is I've ruined your whole life, because every time you're going to drive places now, you're going to be going, hey, wait a minute, stop, look at that. Everybody else is going to be looking at you like, what? And you say, oh, look, right there. Don't you see the erosional remnant? So it's really kind of fun to see the West and central United States from new eyes now. Even the river bottoms now take on a different meaning after you've seen the flat bottom coulees with the cliffs and then another layer above it. You're going to see that everywhere. Everywhere. Yep.
Is there a connection between the layers up in that area and the layers that are evident in the Grand Canyon?
Certainly. Now, I'm not a geologist, but I will tell you what I do know is those layers that are in the Grand Canyon, some of them cross the entire continent, and some of them even go to, are traceable to Europe. Okay, so that's interesting. How did that happen over millions of years? They're big, flat sheets. Incidentally, that's another point. And sometimes between those flat layers is 10,000 to 1,000,000 years. So that means for 10,000 or 1,000,000 years before this layer came on top of it, there was no erosion. So you see what I'm saying? You had to have it boom, 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 just like what we see from some of the waterborne layers at Mount St. Helens depositions, flat layers in great detail laid right on top of each other in 6 hours by surges. So it had to be that way rather than the story we've been told. And remember, why are they telling the story? To get deep time. Why are they telling deep time? So they have time for evolution. So they reinterpreted the obvious, that all these layers with all these dead things laid down by water all over the earth, that had to be slow over millions of years, even though that the primary fossil that we find in these layers are ocean shells. That makes up 95% of the fossils. So they're from ocean creatures. Yeah.
Read especially like Genesis 8, it says three things really caused the flood. It says the mountains of the deep, which we've talked about. It says the windows of heaven,
Yep.
and it also says the rain from heaven.
Yes.
So there's got three different things that cause.
Three different things. I could give you a paper on that written by Michael Ord and my friend Mark Ammenrud, both from Bozeman, that give you a lot of insight on their view on that. And I actually agree with them on that. But that's getting into beyond what we have time for, because we have 40 seconds left. So, yeah. Okay, one last question.
You mentioned mountains, the mountains were jutting up.
Yes.
Is that a different process of what you were talking about? Or is that just part of the erosion?
I'm not sure. Oh, all right. So let's back up. Wow. 20 seconds. Okay. Think of it this way that, and I was really cool to see that when we went on the field trip, they showed a little video clip, and maybe you could do that another time, but where they ran a towel down a ramp, and when it hit an obstruction, how it buckled. So if you think about our continent moving across the ocean rapidly, being pulled by something, some people think it's on water, others think that, and Tim Clary is thinking that part of the ocean floor subducted down towards the core through the mantle, and that pulled our continent across rapidly across the ocean, and then it hits a change in viscosity where there's not the gravity pulling it anymore, and it stops suddenly. And then when all that mass of land stops, what's going to happen? The mountains come up. And where are the mountains? All along the oceans. All right? And then you have mass on the backside, and that maybe is what pushed up the Appalachians. But then in the middle area, we have currents washing off, and it's planing it down at the same time. All this is going on at the same time. And I think the trenches opened up in the ocean, and that's where the water drained down to. So this is happening at massive speeds. That's ripping the surface of the earth while we're still below the sea, And then finally we peak up above it, and then it channelizes. Okay, we better quit there. So thank you for your time, and that was a fun one to do.
Thank you, Kevin. That gives us a much different perspective than we're used to, so we appreciate that. We're going to take a 15-minute break and be back for the Amazing Dinosaurs with Brian Young. All right, we're ready to get back and get started. If you take your seats. Bring our drones back down to the ground for a little bit. We have Brian's going to talk to us about the amazing dinosaurs.
All right. Yeah. If I get going too soon, they're going to miss all the fun stuff here. Did I get that in? I did. All right. Well, yeah, we are going to talk about amazing dinosaurs. And as we get going here, before we get started, really, I want to show you a video clip from years back here when Sarah Palin was running for vice president. You might know the famous actor Matt Damon. And what Matt Damon, he was being interviewed and talking about Sarah Palin. And this is what he said about her. Watch this clip here. Well, I guess we're not up yet, are we? There we go. All right. Oh, you know what? My audio's not plugged in. Hang on. There we go. Okay, I am plugged in. And we'll try it again.
Crazy. Did she really? I need to know if she really thinks dinosaurs were here 4,000 years ago. That's an important, I want to know that. I really do. Because she's going to have the nuclear codes. You know, I want to know if she thinks dinosaurs were here 4,000 years ago, or if she banned.
You get that? I really want to know, does she really believe dinosaurs were here just 4,000 years ago? Because she's going to have the nuclear codes. The basic implication is this, is that if you believe that dinosaurs lived just a few thousand years ago, you're crazy. You might push the button, right? Well, I believe that dinosaurs were here just a few thousand years ago. And maybe even just 100 or 200 years ago. I don't know. But there are some very reputable reports. There's even possibilities that there could be some of those type of things alive today in the ocean. Okay, maybe even on land. Now that might sound really crazy, but you're going to see some of that evidence as we go through here today. I got to figure out why I'm pulling myself apart here. I'm like 4 pounds lighter than I was when I came here this morning because I was just out there dealing with a trailer, and I think I have sweat out 4 pounds. I'm pulling up my pants and everything here, so very professional. Anyway, what we're going to do is I want to show you that this is my favorite Bible. Some of you have seen it before. I love the Bible, and I try to read it every day. As a matter of fact, a good challenge for you, my son just challenged me here about a month and a half ago to read the whole Bible through in a month. And he said, you know, nobody would read any other book throughout a year or 2 or 3 or 10 years because you lose so much context. Nobody else would do that. I mean, you're not going to read the Iliad or anything over that amount of time, but yet we do that with the Bible. And so I thought, man, all right, well, I'll do it. And sure enough, we did it. Actually, we did it in about 3.5 weeks, both of us. And my brother, Wes, he read the whole thing 13 times in 1 year. Now, I don't think it was something that I want to do every time, but there was value in it because there were so many stories that you get kind of scrunched up, and you know, you might read one and then 3 days later you're reading a similar thing, but now you're reading, you know, time after time after time, you see the same things happening, and it does give you an interesting perspective of Scripture. And so when I read Scripture, I believe Scripture interprets Scripture. That's all it is. So when I open, that's Revelation. We're not going to do Revelation today. We're going to deal with Genesis. Okay. From Genesis to Revelation, I believe that this is the literal inspired Word of God. It is inerrant, okay? But so many people think that's what Revelation is, right? It's just a book about fire and brimstone, right? Isn't that what it is? No, it's a book about Jesus Christ. The very words are a revelation of Jesus Christ, right? Likewise, creation, folks, let me tell you, it isn't just about how we got here. It is about Jesus Christ. I'm all about creation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a creation ministry. But it is about Jesus. You know, the Genesis story, it is so wonderful, and even that is pointing us to Jesus all the way through. You know, it's interesting that the very first recorded words that we see Adam saying is, "She shall be called woman." Now, I'm sure there may have been other things, but that's the first recorded words. Why? Because you see, Adam is a type of Christ, and what Adam is doing is he is presenting his bride before his Father, and he pronounces her name before the Father, just like what we read in Revelation. That's what Jesus is going to do. He will pronounce your name before his Father in heaven. It says it right there in Revelation. I mean, these are the kind of patterns that we see. Everything is about Jesus. And as soon as we lose that with creation or dinosaurs or any of that, then we might have let that pendulum swing a little too far. That this isn't just a scientific debate. This is a spiritual debate. But many people, as I said, when they read the book of Revelation, that's what they see is simply fire and brimstone. It is not. And Genesis is not just creation either. We have to take it into context. So sometimes things just aren't, what they seem to be, and we need to remember that. And so the same is true with dinosaurs. It always isn't necessarily the way you think it is. There's more to it than what you're getting because you're only hearing a small, narrow view of the evidence. And in some cases, you're not even hearing the evidence. A lot of people say, well, what happened to the dinosaurs? Years ago, I took a graduate course on dinosaur extinction. I paid good money to learn what I'm about to give you for free, because that's all it was worth. I was taught that the new plant began to evolve that the dinosaurs started to eat, and they didn't realize that it would cause them to become constipated. They couldn't go to the bathroom and died. It was called the constipation theory, and I'm not joking. I paid money to learn this. Not the best way to go. Or not go. Then there was the tight short theory, they called it, where the climate became too warm and the males became sterile, couldn't reproduce. Or you probably heard about the big meteorite that came crashing into the earth, causing a big dust storm, blocking out the sun. They don't believe that one anymore now either. You see, now the meteorite hit the oceans, caused a big tidal wave to come in on land and bury them in water and mud. That's why in my book, Doubts About Creation, Not After This, I have many quotes of evolution saying local floods buried these dinosaurs. They won't admit Noah's flood because that would mean God's word is true. And so they can't admit that God's word is true, so anything that goes or agrees with God's word isn't even considered when you're dealing with the secular evidence today. And by the way, do you know that we have found the same 52 species of dinosaurs above the meteorite hit that we find under the meteorite hit, so therefore the meteorite hit did not kill the dinosaurs? And so when these kind of things are coming around, they're having problems to say, well, what happened to the dinosaurs? So they keep grabbing at straws, and some say, well, maybe they had, not enough food to eat. Maybe they had too much food to eat. And maybe some of the wrong kind of food to eat. Some of the hot lunches at school gave them bad gas, and that took care of the problem. I'm not kidding. I paid money to learn that burping and farting dinosaurs is what happened. This is the kind of thing that they were scrambling to come up with something to explain what happened to them. Well, throughout the years, what ended up happening is because of Archaeoraptor and then Archaeopteryx and all of these kind of things that we'll talk about, what we see here, Archaeopteryx, is that they said dinosaurs turned into birds. So today, this is the number one theory that has won out, is they really didn't go extinct, they simply turned into birds. It is crazy. Let me tell you, this is nothing but a bird. There are even evolutionists who say that this is nothing but a bird. Now, we have so many different issues that I don't have time to get into as far as all of the changes that would have to take place, because we have a different number of chambers in the hearts between a dinosaur and a bird. We got hollow bones, but yet they're saying, oh, we found dinosaurs with hollow bones. No, you found dinosaur bones that are missing pieces, but you have not found hollow bones. Everything that they find, they're just trying to make it fit into a bird relationship. This is why when you ever saw the movie Jurassic Park, you saw that after they wipe out all the dinosaurs, the guy gets in a helicopter, he's flying away, he sees a flock of birds going by, and he leans back and he gives this little content nod. The hidden message years ago even was, they made it, they survived, they turned into birds. And it has only grown and grown. I don't know if you ever go to these places, they have these dinosaurs for kids and you pay way too much to go see them. Like $30 or something, I think they had it in Grand Island one time, and you see all these dinosaurs with feathers all over them. When there is absolutely no evidence of that. None. Now, you may disagree with that. If there were evolutionists sitting in here today, they would say, you are wrong. I'm going to show you why they would say that I was wrong. And then you decide if I'm wrong. Okay? Now, first of all, before I do that, I want you to understand something. What day were birds made on the days of creation? Day 5. What days were land animals made? Day 6. Therefore, could birds turn into dinosaurs since birds were there first? No. If we think biblically, we should hear any evidence as saying dinosaurs turned into birds and reject it immediately based on the foundation and authority of God's Word, period. But we don't think biblically. And so many people are being taught, our kids, our grandchildren are believing and being taught that dinosaurs turned into birds. Even in the Museum of the Rockies in Montana here in Bozeman, you can go there and see this beautiful, feathered dinosaur. Even though there wasn't a fossil in the world showing us this, not one. In our museum, you probably saw, if you went through it, you saw in the cave there was a duck down there with the dinosaur. The reason being is because that's exactly what we see in fossils. Do you know that we have found parrots? We have found sandpipers. We have found just penguins. You name it. Just about every type of bird has been found with dinosaurs in the fossil record. But yet you won't find that in any museum unless it's a creation museum. Because they don't want you to know the truth. It's that simple. So this is the kind of thing we're seeing. Let me show you some of the so-called evidence that they're saying that's out there. All right, this is just from 2014 here, but it's constant. You can find it everywhere. Here this says, for the last 20 years, huge numbers of fossils from China have dramatically demonstrated that larger number of dinosaur species that were closely related to the birds. Now, I want you to understand something. They're saying they're closely related. How do they know that? Well, because we think we found feathers on them. If you find feathers on a dinosaur, does that mean they're related to birds? No. Guess what? I have hair. I know it's not much, but I have some. You know what else? My dog has hair. Am I related? No, just because we have the same thing doesn't mean that we're related. It seems it's just a common design from a common designer. So even though I do not believe that we have found feathers on dinosaurs, even if we do find it, which I suppose could be possible, I doubt it. But if we did, it still doesn't prove anything. It does not show relationship just because there's feathers on it. Do you know that a chicken actually has scales? Right? Check out its feet. It's got scaly feet. Right? And they have little hair if you pull off all the feathers. Okay, they look funny running around, but when you do that, you see all the hair, right? And when you butcher them, you have to singe the hair. And so this isn't a proof of relationship when you see those things. But anyway, it goes on and it says that closely related to the birds, they had all manner of feathers on their bodies. In other words, they have every type of feather you can imagine. That's what it's making it sound like, right? And it goes on, however, a new find here from eastern Russia, published today in Science, suggests that in fact feathers, or at least feather-like structures, may have been present in huge numbers of other species of dinosaurs. Now, which is it? Feathers or feather-like structures? Because there's a difference between those two, right? Now, it continues to go on, and it says, just because we have, say, some skin from the legs doesn't mean there were not feathers elsewhere on the body. Wait a minute, did you find feathers or did you not find feathers? Because just because we have skin doesn't mean there aren't feathers on the rest of the body. I don't know if it was a third grader that wrote this, but this is not making sense. It continues. In particular, feathers are rarely preserved as the local conditions have to be just right. So finds are currently largely limited to a few sites globally with some additional, something's wrong there. But anyway, notice they have to be just right. You know what that just right is? Noah's flood. Okay, global flood would do that. Water and mud. You have to have a lot of water and mud to bury something and turn it into a fossil. If you don't get buried, removed from the oxygen in the air in about 30 seconds' time, you do not fossilize. The very fact that we find billions of fossils all around the world laid down in sedimentary rock, which is rock that's been laid down by water all over the world, suggests that there was a flood, a global flood. But no. Local floods. A local flood here, a local flood there. And anyway, it goes on and it says, thus the possibility remains. Wait a minute, I thought you were just telling me it's a fact. Now it's the possibility remains that many species had feathers, but that evidence is just lacking at the moment. In some cases, this is a reasonable inference, since, for example, several T-Rexes are known with feathers. Did you know T-Rexes are known with feathers? Strongly implying that even T-Rex had them. Huh? Yeah. Again, third grader. I don't get this, but this is, professional stuff. What we don't tend to see are more complex structures of filaments and multiple strands that are in part characteristic of later feathers and the relationship between scale and feathers. In other words, you don't see how feathers turn, scales turn into feathers or anything like that. And it goes on, at least 6 skulls of the species, along with hundreds of bones, have turned up in fossils bed that once a lake bottom and is now a Siberian hillside. Most of the fossils were juveniles, which suggests that they died in single events, not in a mass catastrophe. How does that suggest that? Let me really tell you what they're trying to say here. Not Noah's flood, you crazy creationists. That's what they're really trying to say here. It goes on. And it says the plant-eating dinosaurs likely died and fell to the lake bottom. Why? Because you need water and mud. Almost every time you find new fossils being announced in papers, notice they'll say, oh, it was probably, fell into a lake, something like that. Guys, I live in this world, and do you know that we have, we grew up with cattle. I've never seen cow after cow after cow after cow going to the same little, mud pit and getting stuck and dying and fossilizing. It doesn't happen. But yet this is how they explain things. You can go to Ash Falls and you can go to these other places and they say there's these tar pits and, animal after animal, apparently they were trying to help each other out and, they keep getting stuck in there. This doesn't even make sense. We don't see that happening today. And like I said, you have to get buried immediately, completely, or else you don't fossilize. So if something's stuck in the mud and it dies, it will not fossilize. It has to get completely buried to turn into a fossil. But they always know they need water, and that's why they say this, but they just won't admit Noah's flood. And it goes on, fell to the lake bottom where eruptions soon after covered them with a fine ash. That is what preserved the feather imprints with the fossil bones. But the new Siberian fossils are the best example yet that some of these bird-like dinosaurs, beaked dinosaurs, had feathers. Let me show you then the best evidence yet. Are you ready? Here it is. Ooh. See those little hairs-like things there? That's it. Let me show you the rest of it here. Scaly things. That's the best evidence. Now, some would say, well, Archaeopteryx, because we have feather imprints. Yes, that's a bird, and even some evolutionists say it's nothing but a bird. Therefore, it's a bird, not a dinosaur. But this is the kind of stuff that is being used to make those things like you saw there in that Museum of the Rockies there in Montana with feathered dinosaurs. And so this is crazy. So like I said, when did God make T-Rex? Day 6 of creation. By the way, when did God make man? Day 6 of creation. So did dinosaurs and humans live together then? Yes, they were created on the same day. Absolutely. if you think biblically. It's interesting, in a recent PLOS magazine, a peer-reviewed journal, a very prestigious magazine, 1 out of 7 scientists admitted to fake data in their research. 3 out of 4 committed questionable research practices, and 1 out of 3 admitted failing to present data that contradicts previous research. I am telling you, we think that these scientists are almost like gods. But I'm telling you, they're just like you and I. And I'm telling you that they are just as corrupt and have just as much of a sinful nature, and there's so much money involved that it corrupts true science so oftentimes. I think anybody who has done research here probably has seen some of the sketchy things that has gone on, especially in the academia, to get money, to get grants, all of those kinds of things. And this is what the ones that are admitting it. Like I said, there is absolutely no evidence of scales turned into feathers. They're made, there's keratin in both of them, so they say, they must be related, same stuff. No, guess what? I'm dirt, so are the animals. We have the same stuff. God uses the same stuff to make different creatures. That is what the Bible even indicates, and therefore that's not a surprise to us. All right? They'll use this a lot. They call it homologous structures. Basically, we have a radius and an ulna. And they'll say, boys and girls, a cat, a chicken, a bat, we all have a radius and an ulna. We must be related. No, a common design. Did you know the Pontiac, the lug nuts on a Pontiac fit on a Chevy? Does that mean they evolved from a Nissan? No, it means the same designer, GM, made both vehicles, so they used the same thing on both vehicles. That's all it is. Okay? So, anyway, we lack completely fossils of all intermediate stages between reptile scales and the most primitive feather. Now, that was back in 2000. There's still some people that will admit this, but it's harder and harder to get people to admit this today because they'll just get railroaded. But where's the evidence then? Just show us the evidence if there are feathers, and there aren't. We see feather-like structures, they say. That's an interpretation of what they're seeing. But we do not see feathers. So anyway, I'm not going to get too much into that. I think you know that under a microscope, scales and feathers are completely different. There's a design in scales and in feathers, but they're completely different. Feathers are almost like Velcro. They've got these little hooks, and under a microscope you see it. So this is what a bird's doing when it preens itself. It's getting those hooks to hook back together so that the air doesn't go through the wings. So a very great design, and it's certainly not a frayed scale. It's order. Now, you think about the origin of flight, too. Not only do we have hollow bones, multivalved hearts, the differences there, but you have behavioral changes that would have to evolve, too. Abilities to fly. And I remember seeing in the textbooks sometimes they would show this little creature that, again, its front legs are starting to turn into feathers, and so it's learning to fly. And so how did it learn to fly? Well, there's probably a bug, and it's like going like this, right? Jumping up to try and get this thing, and finally it kind of gets better and better. Remember what we said before, survival of the fittest? That's not a very fit thing, right? It wouldn't make it. But that's what they do. And so how about this? I mean, you really only have one shot at this. You have, this poor dinosaur evolving feathers, and now you got one shot. You go up to the top of the mountain. If it doesn't work, evolution starts all over again. Doc was saying, I think it was yesterday, about this too. I mean, think about the male-female thing. They can't really answer that. Let's say, the odds of evolution happening are just so ridiculous. It is beyond mathematical possibility by eons. But let's just say it happened. That somewhere over in Africa I evolved. Now what? Now you got to get a female to evolve over there. And now you only have to do about 50 years that this has to happen, that she has to evolve in a lot of different ways than me, right? She has to evolve in the exact same place as me so that we can run into each other. And then to make the odds even go way up, that ought to just tell you there's no way this is going to happen, that she would actually have to be interested. No way. Right? Doesn't make any sense. Well, are dinosaurs in the Bible? How many of you did not know dinosaurs were in the Bible? Just out of curiosity. Okay. Most of you know. I'm going to go through this really fast then because I would rather give you things that you don't know. But let me real quick for just some of you. First of all, the word dinosaur is not in the Bible for a good reason. The same reason the word email is not there, right? That word wasn't around when the Bible was translated into English in the year 1600. We did not even find dinosaur bones until 1830. And by the way, there was a guy then in 1841, Sir Richard Owen, an opponent of Darwin, actually coined the name dinosaur, meaning terrible lizard. So that word dinosaur did not come about until 1841. That's not that long ago. We're talking Civil War period just slightly before. That's when the word dinosaur was invented. The Bible had already been written in English for 241 years. But you do find them under some different names. For example, unicorns. Did you know the Bible talks about unicorns? Yep, sure does. Here are a couple of examples, but you might say, oh, now I'm giving you the King James here, but even in the Latin Vulgate, I don't know if you saw, if you went through the museum, you saw that we have a woolly rhino in there. And today, to this day, we have an Asian rhinoceros that has one horn. And do you know that its Latin name is Rhinoceros unicornis? And when you go to the Bible and you look at the Latin Vulgate, which is the Latin translation of the Scriptures, we see that in these verses, one is called rhinoceros and the other is unicornis. The exact same name that we have for the Latin name of the single-horned rhinoceros today. We've never found anything in the fossil record with a horn on a horse. You know, the typical unicorn thought that you think of today. Never. It's never been in the fossil record. That is a make-believe myth. But truth be told, unicorns are real. It's just that you have the wrong idea of what they are. The Bible talks about them. It's a single-horned creature. And we do find them in the fossil record. And we do even have some alive today. If it's not that rhinoceros, we have one of these triceratop-type creatures with a single horn. So maybe one of these is the unicorn. Okay? You're probably familiar with Job, chapter 40, starting at verse 15, going to the end of the chapter, you have this awesome creature called Behemoth. And it says that he feeds on grass like an ox, power in the muscles of his belly, his tail sways like a cedar tree, bones like tubes of bronze, limbs like rods of iron. An amazing creature. I'm going to let you go read it more on your own, but as you do, picture a dinosaur. Now also read your footnotes, because most footnotes in the Bible will tell you it's probably an elephant or a hippopotamus. I'd love to meet the man that wrote that footnote. Have you ever seen the tail of an elephant? It's not a cedar tree. Okay? It's more like a toothpick. And the hippo, yeah, that sure took care of the problem, didn't it? You should have seen him at the zoo when I was taking that picture. They're all grabbing their kids, get away from that guy. No, they don't have a tail like a cedar tree, do they? No. Okay? So maybe this is Behemoth. Behemoth had a big belly. I mean, if this is the reasoning that we're using, just, oh, a big tail, okay, there. No, you got to take the whole package. And when you take the whole package, nothing else fits. Even though some of your footnotes might say alligator, crocodile kind of thing, well, they don't eat grass like an ox. The only animal that fits, and it fits perfect in every detail, is a dinosaur. Go read it. Every detail. I think very likely this is Behemoth. Now I've had pastors tell me, oh, no, that in Job, that's not a real animal. Okay, kind of going what Doc was saying, you know, you've got this whole idea. Is it myth? Is it allegory? Or is it literal? Because this is literal. Remember, the whole point of Job was God is saying, hey, how dare you question me? Look what I made. To say that this is myth or allegory, would God be saying, hey, imagine that there was a creature like this. That's how big I am. If you could imagine that, that's me. No, he's saying, look, Job, you know this animal. That's what he's saying. Now, you can go to Job 41. The entire chapter of Job 41 talks about this awesome creature here called Leviathan. Now, Leviathan is pretty cool because it says that the doors of his mouth are ringed about with fearsome teeth. His back has rows of shields that are closely sealed together, so close to the next that not even air can pass between them. And it goes on, and it says here that fire streams from his mouth, sparks of fire shoot out, smoke pours from his nostrils as from a boiling pot over a fire. What could that be? I mean, look at me. Do you guys really think that if there was an animal out there that if he was threatened by something someday could just go and blow fire like that? Excuse me. I shouldn't have put that spice on my lunch. Really? Blowing fire? Oh, yeah, see, the Bible, that's not real. That's not literal. Hey, the Bible says it. I believe it. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not true. Okay? There's a lot of things that God says in the Bible, and I don't know. I don't understand it, and that's okay. I always tell people, if I could tell you why God did everything he did, how God did everything he did, you know what that would make me? God. You know what that would make God? Really stupid. God is so big that we cannot wrap our minds around him. And I'll tell you something, I don't dare put God on the stand and make myself judge and jury and decide whether he is right or not. He is God. And really, that's what God was saying. Don't you dare put me on the stand. I'm not on trial here. You are. We need to remember that. But anyway, it says a sword, or his chest is as hard as a rock, so that the sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does a spear, a dart, or a javelin. Iron he treats like straw, bronze like rotten wood. What could that be? Sounds like a dragon to me. We'll get to that in a moment. But before I do, sounds like it was blowing fire. Did you know that today, still alive, we have the bombardier beetle, which shoots out its back end of noxious gas at over 212 degrees Fahrenheit, never misses its target? Pretty impressive. Yeah, I know some of you can do it too, but it's a different process. Okay? Yeah. You know what's funny? The people that laugh the hardest, they know, yeah. Anyway, guys, you see, this thing has chemicals and enzymes that are mixed together in separate storage chambers. When it mixes it together in the combustion tube, it meets the oxygen in the air, poof, it goes off. Pretty incredible. And how could that evolve? What if the chemicals weren't mixed right? Okay, what if the combustion tube hadn't formed yet? Poor guy goes, I wonder what happens when I do this. Poof. Okay, evolution starts all over, right? Ouch, yeah. It's amazing. This thing goes off 500 pulses in a second. It braces itself like a machine gun. On the Amazing Animals video, you'll see actual video of this thing. It goes off 500 times in a second. If it didn't do that, it would like a rocket, and that's going to be cool till you hit the tree. Okay? It's not going to work for evolution. So all kinds of things. Here's a frog going after one of these things. He gets sprayed. Then he runs away with the tongue hanging from his mouth, no longer likes that hot Mexican food anymore. It's an incredible creature. Now, how does it fit with dinosaurs? Because we have bonehead dinosaurs in the fossil record, like Parasaurolophus and others, that maybe, not saying, well, I don't know, it wasn't there, but maybe they blew fire. Because they have these storage chambers in them. What if they mixed chemicals like the bombardier beetle has in those chambers? It would do a U-turn at the top, go right out its nostril, poof, you'd have fire. I don't know. All I know is that there was a creature called Leviathan, and he did blow fire, because that's what Job 41 says. It's that simple. I don't have to understand it. I believe it. But it's certainly not unscientific to say such a thing could happen. Gary Larson was right. This is his idea of what happened to the dinosaurs. They were smoking, just not cigarettes, right? But some of them were. Now, like I said, it sounds like a dragon. Well, guess what? Dragon is a word that was around when the Bible was translated into English, and it's all over in Scripture. Okay, I'm not going to get too much into it, but if you went into, well, it'll come up. Isaiah 43 talks about dragons. We see them in Jeremiah 14, verse 6. Isaiah 27, verse 1 talks about the dragon that's in the sea. Psalms talks about the dragon that's in the waters. Could that be a chronosaur? Or maybe a type of plesiosaur? You bet. Absolutely could be. Isaiah 30 talks about a flying serpent. Could that be a pterodactyl, pteranodon? You're going to see, I think, probably. Quetzalcoatlus, any of those type of flying reptiles. In the museum, you may have seen that dictionary. 1946, Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. You will look up the word dragon, the first definition, now rare. First definition. Just in 1946, they knew that dragons were real, just rare. Today, dragon, oh, that's just all mythology and all that kind of stuff, right? Or not mythology, but myth. Anyway, did dinosaurs go on Noah's Ark? I'm going to go through this real quick, too. Let me ask you this. How many of you believe kangaroos lived in the Middle East? All right, you know, kangaroos only live in Australia today, all right? Pretty smart group. Let me ask you this. How many of you believe Noah's Ark was a real boat? How many of you believe two of every kind of animal got on that boat? How many of you believe that that boat landed on Mount Ararat in the Middle East? How many of you believe that a kangaroo is a kind of animal? How many of you believe that two of every kind of animal that got off of that boat got on that boat, or got on the boat, got off of the boat? How many of you believe kangaroos lived in the Middle East? Takes 15 seconds to change your mind here in Hastings, doesn't it? Guys, God said take two of every kind of animal. They got on the boat, they got off of the boat. But you see, they spread out. After the flood, we had some interesting things that were going on, and that is called the Ice Age. We're going to get to it in a moment. But what happened is, when the Ice Age happened, because a result of Noah's flood, the fountains of the great deep are breaking open. The waters are shooting up into the sky. Cracking the earth open, you're going to have a lot of gases, volcanoes, things like that. Gases cause colder climates, so you're going to have that moist air, warm, moist air coming down in snow and ice. So the Ice Age would occur right after Noah's flood. We're going to talk about that on the next session. But for now, I want you to understand this then. The Ice Age would take waters up in that ice, lowering the oceans. Do you know you lower the oceans just 150 feet and you have land bridges that are exposed? And so once Noah got off of the ark, those animals and the people had an opportunity to basically spread to different continents. Some of them went one way, and that's the only way they went, and whatever, and then, well, like I said, we'll talk more about it, and then they remained there. But nonetheless, kangaroos were in the Middle East. They just left. Okay? So, did they go on Noah's Ark? Yes, because a dinosaur is a kind of animal. God said, take two of every kind. So they survived the flood, but we have reputable people like Billy Graham. When he was asked this question, did dinosaurs go on Noah's Ark? He says no. Why? Because dinosaurs, the reason is because dinosaurs and similar ancient creatures that we only know from fossils were extinct by the time God created the garden. Do you hear what he's saying? Theistic evolution. Millions of years. You see, God created this world. It was here for millions of years. And then God placed Adam and Eve on this earth. And then he put the soul, or usually they say soul, of the man into one of the monkeys. And that was Adam. That's kind of the teaching. Now, I know a lot of you love Billy Graham. That's great. I think he's a brother in Christ. I'm not trying to throw him completely under the bus here. I just disagree with his theology here. I believe he knew Jesus Christ. I believe I'm going to see him in heaven. But he was just wrong on this. Because what this is saying is that there was death before Adam and Eve. Dinosaurs died, went extinct before Adam and Eve. That means death is not the result, or cause, I should say, of sin. Sin is not the cause of death. Right? Adam and Eve, didn't matter if they sinned or not. Death was already in the world. See, death was only spiritual, they'll say. When Adam and Eve died, it was spiritual death, because after all, God says to Adam, the day you eat of it, the day you will die. And he lives to be 930 years old. Well, even most of your footnotes will tell you that really what it says is, dying you will die. It's like you cut a branch off of a tree, lay it down on the sidewalk. Dying, it's going to die. The dying process began. Judgment had been pronounced. And so, it was physical and spiritual death that happened in the Garden of Eden there. But let's just run with this for a moment. If physical death was already around before Adam and Eve sinned, anytime you mess with Genesis, you got something to fix over there in the New Testament. If it was spiritual death, I don't believe that. I'm running with this idea. If it was spiritual death, then what do we do in Genesis or in Romans when it says, by one man death came into the world, spiritual death, so also by one man, Jesus Christ, comes the resurrection of the dead. It will only be a spiritual resurrection. Ooh. Do you know that's what the Sadducees believed in Jesus' day? And do you know that Jesus publicly rebuked them for believing that? That's why they were so sad, you see. They did not believe in the physical resurrection of the dead. And Jesus said, you're wrong. We could go on and on about that, but I want that to simmer a little bit. Now, frankly, I'm not so worried about how dinosaurs went on the ark. I'm more worried about the woodpecker myself, okay? But I'm sure he got that one figured out too. How could they fit on the ark? Well, as you saw in the museum, if you went through, it is a big boat. It would hold 522 railroad cars. Each railroad car could hold 100 or 240 sheep, which means over 125,000 sheep could go on the ark. With that, God says take 2 of every kind. Scientists said there's about 18,000 kinds of animals. So you double that, that's 36,000. Let's double it again just to be kind. There's 72. Add some extra for the clean animals, 75,000 animals. That means that the ark is only about 60% filled with animals, leaving the other 40% for the supplies and the 8 people that needed to go along. And do you know that that's actually old information? Because now, because of DNA and all of that, we know there aren't even 18,000 kinds of animals. This is the old stuff. Now it only gets worse for them because we know now, because of DNA, that a kind is probably closest to what we call a family in our taxonomy classification. There's only about 950 families. That means Noah's Ark probably only took about 5,000 animals at most, leaving the other 96% of that boat for the 8 people and the supplies that went along. Plenty of room on this boat for the animals. By the way, that's another criticism of how did, Adam name all those animals in a 24-hour day. There's no way he could do that. Can't be a 24-hour day. Nobody could name the animals in 24 hours. First of all, he didn't name all the animals. He names the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, and the cattle. He does not name insects, marine animals. Marine animals remove 95% of the species of animals today. 95%. And he doesn't say dog, or chihuahua, poodle. He says dog. He names the original kind. Being extremely generous, Adam basically could name about 2,500 animals. That means he could name one animal every 5 seconds, have a 5-minute break at the end of every hour, and get them all named in less than 4 hours. Boy, God really overworked him. Okay? It's not scientifically impossible. The ark is big. Here it is next to a city block. Houses would fit into Noah's ark. So dinosaurs are not going to have a problem going on this boat. Not to mention, do you know what the average size of a dinosaur is? If I took all the bones of all the dinosaurs that have ever been found, what's the average size of a dinosaur? Chicken to sheep size. Some will go as big as a small cow, but most of them are, say, chicken to sheep. Michael Crichton in Jurassic Park, I think he says chicken. Why did you guys think they were so big then? Well, because some are, but hardly any of them. I've been involved in a dinosaur dig in Wyoming. What was it, 3 square miles? Estimated 3,000 dinosaurs. We were finding nothing bigger than a cow. They were everywhere. It is rare to find the big ones. But they show you the big ones because you're not going to pay $20 to go to a museum to see these little lizard-sized dinosaurs, are you? No, you don't care. And that's why in the movie Jurassic Park, when it came out, kids were getting excited about dinosaurs, so they had to get you, excited, or they were not getting excited about dinosaurs, so they needed to get them excited. So what did they do? Do you remember? You think you can handle it if I show you? Well, this is what they did to get you excited about dinosaurs in that movie. They scared you. They had the velociraptor. This thing would rip you open, your guts are coming out. Everybody going, oh, gross, we love it. More. Right? I've seen bear with bigger claws. All right? Guys, they used fear as a gimmick, but do you know, I don't think dinosaurs were mean until after they got off of the ark. Read your Bible. God says this, now I will put the fear of man into the animals when Noah gets off the boat. Prior to that, it seems the relationship that Adam had with the animals was still in existence. But anyway, do you know that we have here Sauroposeidon and Brachiosaur? Do you know we only found, I can't remember if it was like, I think 2 bones of Sauroposeidon? That's it. But what they do is they find, oh, it's much bigger than a brachiosaur, but it looks like it's a sauropod that walks on all 4. Therefore, we'll make it look like that, and we give it a different name, just because it's bigger. When I do tours in the museum there with kids, I say, I'm bigger than you are. Why? Because you're older. Yeah, that dinosaur is bigger than the other one. Why? Because it's older. Did you know that most reptiles, as long as they live, never stop growing, so the oldest alligator of its kind should be the largest alligator of its kind? If dinosaurs were living 900 years like humans were living before Noah's flood, like the Bible says, then they would grow for 900 years, and they would get very large. So, do you think that God is going to take this huge Sauroposeidon on Noah's Ark, or really just a big brachiosaur? Is he going to take that on Noah's Ark to have babies when he gets off the ark, or is he going to take a smaller, younger, healthier one? Smaller, younger, healthier one that'll have lots of kids afterwards, right? You see, out of all these dinosaurs, scientists are now saying, creationists have been saying this for years and years, and the evolutionists are finally catching up, but that they've been naming them too many names. This is probably just a baby growing up, getting its horns, getting a little older, and then as an adult. And horns, they do weird things sometimes. Okay? I mean, think about this. If you found these in the fossil record, and they weren't alive today, do you think they'd give them the same name? Not a chance. They'd give them all different kinds of names, wouldn't they? And we see it all the time. I have to tell you this story. I shouldn't because I don't have time, but I'm going to anyway. About a month ago, my dog wakes me up in the middle of the night, and so, sorry for this image, but I basically am in my boxers, and I grab my gun, and I grab my flashlight, and I go outside, and I think, you stupid dog, you got me up because he was barking at the pivot coming around the field because there's something piling up about 9 feet high. And I think, doggone it, dog. And I thought, wait a minute, where's the rest of the pivot? So I go a little closer, and I turn on the flashlight. There was a 6-point bull elk standing outside in our yard. Yeah. Anyway, horns do weird things. They do weird things. And so this is one of the difficulties of interpreting the fossil record, and they give different names because, guys, if you find something new, you get to name it. And you can say, I discovered Sauroposeidon. Okay? And then you become somebody because you're the guy that discovered this. So there's all of that pride and that gets into narcissism that gets into it, but they're discovering this. CAT scans showing these are the same species at different stages of life. We've been naming them too many different names. They find out crests do different things. Number of teeth change as age goes and so on. So one study showed that of 1,401 scientific names given to dinosaurs, 16% were duplicates and 32% were just wrong. That was just one study. Even the size of dinosaurs, do you know that basically applying to what we apply to dinosaurs, they applied it to elephants and it made the elephants weigh twice as much, so they think that they have been putting the size of these dinosaurs off by 50%. There's so much that goes on. I mean, we think that these scientists know so much, but guys, they're just really good storytellers. If you weren't there to see it, that's not really good science then. So yes, there are large dinosaurs, just not very many of them. Fact is, we're deeply impressed by the size of dinosaurs. That's it. Like I said, you wouldn't pay that kind of money. And by the way, sharp teeth does not mean eat meat either. Mean or eat meat. I ask kids all the time, what did T-Rex eat? And they're like, they're so excited to tell me that he ate meat. Okay, because look at those teeth on T-Rex. Well, I can tell you one thing. Before the fall into sin, they didn't eat meat. Nothing did, because there was no death. And those teeth would be great to eat a big old pumpkin or a cantaloupe or, something like that. It would have eaten that. And by the way, we have found in the cracks of T-Rex's teeth chlorophyll, suggesting it ate plants. Yeah. Now, maybe not all the time. Like I said, after the fall, maybe then they started eating things. But there's a lot of arguments out there. Was this fierce predator that would chase you down? Or was it a scavenger? Because its teeth, in the museum, you might see some of the T-Rex teeth, and it's only embedded about that far into the gum, not very far. And so you go after some animal that's going to be writhing around, it's going to be a T-Rex with no teeth. All right? Let alone, how do you hang on to anything? Hey, right? It's not going to work. So a lot of people think it was just a scavenger that would just, go and step on it and eat. But we don't know. We weren't there. And you have to keep that in mind all the time when we're dealing with science. If you weren't there to see it, we can only make guesses, even creationists. The difference is as a creationist, we have the Bible. The Bible gives us some history that tells us about what was going on. So now we have a starting point. We have a notch up on the evolutionists, because we do know somebody who was there, who left us a record. But like I said, sharp teeth doesn't mean eat meat. I mean, look at this guy. What do you think he eats? Anything he wants, right? Well, actually, he only eats fruit and leaves. Still alive today, so I can tell you that. But if this was not in the fossil record, if it wasn't alive today and only in the fossil record, I'll bet they'd be making horror movies out of it, Problem is, it'd have to be a Veggie Tale horror movie, Bob the Tomato, run, Larry, run! Okay? Wouldn't work. Anyway, all kinds of things. Fruit bat, big bats, sharp teeth, don't eat meat. The pacu, cousin of the piranha, sharp teeth, doesn't eat meat. It basically eats nuts and things that fall into the water from underneath trees. We have panda bears, sharp teeth, don't eat meat. Look at this ferocious creature. Ooh, that one's scary. Not really, it's the Chinese water deer. We've even got these mounted in Cabela's at Kearney. Yeah. So, it's just crazy, and we could give you other examples. Want to know what happened to the dinosaurs? I think is a combination of things. Number one, I think that the harsher climates after the flood, because of the Ice Age, which we'll talk about later, were tough on them. Number two, I think it was they would be hunted, just like, for sport today. I mean, who of you hunters wouldn't have one of those things hanging on your wall, if your wife let you? So you wouldn't have one hanging on your wall. And the third thing is I think that they were hunted for food, okay, because God says this to Noah when he gets off the ark. Now, Noah, I give you permission to eat meat. I think the dinosaur said, hey, we're meat. Noah said, I know. I mean, think of the drumsticks on those things, right? And I think they were freaking people out, too. I don't care if it was a 1-foot-tall T-Rex that came into my yard. I'd kill it. Okay? That would freak me out. I see a snake in my yard, I kill it. Now, don't any of you weird snake lovers come up and tell me. I know I said I like animals. Not all animals. Reptiles, they're stupid. I don't get them. Okay? I see a snake, I'm killing it. But anyway, did dinosaurs live at the same time? And obviously they're going to say no. No, after the dinosaurs died out, nearly 65 million years passed before people appeared on Earth. That's the mantra that you see today. Yet we find dinosaur bones with blood cells still in them. Mosquitoes even with blood cells in them. Do you really think blood cells could last 65 million years? No way. Absolutely no way. I don't care if you put blood cells in a lead box and buried it 1,000 feet underground. I'm telling you, it's not going to make it. Yet we find blood cells in dinosaurs all the time now. It's not just once. It's over and over and over again. I want to show you this real quick, too. There are these Ica stones. In 1535, the Spanish conquistadors went over to Peru, and they even wrote about these things in 1535. And these Ica stones have what look like dinosaurs on them. Notice those circles. Why would they put that on there? There's even cave art like this that look kind of like one of those flying reptiles. Now it's interesting, in Leviticus 11:20 it says, all fowls that creep upon all four are an abomination. They were unclean. Isn't that interesting? Birds. Now, the Hebrew is birds, but oftentimes now we see in our more modern translations they'll say insects. Why? Because birds don't have four legs, unless you go to the fossil record. And then we see creatures like this that could fit that description of being an unclean animal. Some of these Ica stones here, notice this one nursing the young. That's an interesting thing. Why would you draw that if this wasn't legitimate and you had seen them? Especially when Lamentations says that there's these sea monsters that nurse their young. They're riding a dinosaur in this case. Notice the ears as well. That's interesting. Now, if they weren't mean before Noah's flood, hey, I'd have tried pterodactyl airlines, wouldn't you? Yeah. Okay. It looks like it's cutting the head off of it. Notice the circles here again. Very interesting that they have these circles. I'll explain that in a moment. We have this urn from Turkey from 530 BC. Look at those ears again. Now remember, they said, did dinosaurs live with people? No. Well, then how did these people draw these things? 530 BC. This is an Egyptian palette called the Narmer palette from 3000 BC. Now, interesting thing here is they have ropes around their necks. This is out of a college textbook here from 2013, but in there they say these are two men training lions. Looks more like a dinosaur to me. But again, they can't admit that dinosaurs and people were together. We have this mask on the side. It looks like Stegosaurus. The handles of this vessel look like dinosaurs. We have some bronze sculptures from the Han Dynasty. Looks just like dragons. Some even look like velociraptors. This is from 206 to BC to 220 AD. We have this here. The Zhou Dynasty from 5 to 600 BC. This vessel. Now, this we have found in the fossil record. They made this out of it. Looks very similar to that. The skin on this looks just like fossilized dinosaur skin as well. How did they make this? Had they not seen dinosaurs? You can go to Cambodia, and they have a Hindu temple there. And on this temple, on the door, they have all these different animals. Things like a baboon and an ostrich and a gazelle and what's that? Looks just like a stegosaurus. Oh no, that's an animal standing in front of a flower. That's what they say it is. When we went to Israel, we took you to Sapori so that you could see this, a guy throwing a big rock at a dinosaur. Or a large peanut, I don't know which. But look at those ears again. Isn't that interesting? Textiles taken off of some of these Inca mummies. They have what look like dinosaurs on them. Here's Megalosaurus, what he looked like here in 1859. Well, first 1852, 1859, and now today. He's changed a little. I guess evolution is true, right? Only in art. You see, the more we find out about these things, the more we discover that, well, we don't know that much. And it's constantly changing. I show you that because maybe, since we keep seeing these long ears on dinosaurs, maybe the reason we see that is because they saw dinosaurs with long ears. Maybe that's why it keeps coming up over and over. Here, the Mayan hadrosaur, at night they kind of put a glow-in-the-dark thing around it. It basically is that there. We have this temple, Mayan mural, 650 to 850 AD is when this was occupied. Inside they have this big painting, and this is what you can buy at the gift store of it. This is the actual painting there, but here's the gift store version. That part there I'm going to blow up for you. Looks just like this. There's the actual painting. This is what we have in our museums today. Notice the ears again. I'd say people lived with dinosaurs. Way up here, 30,000 pre-Columbian artifacts. One of them is this. There's a boat, a guy's legs, his knee is bent. He's got a fishing pole in his hand. His head is here. He's got a hat on his head. And on the hat is what looks exactly like a baby Protoceratops. I'd say people lived with dinosaurs. Guys, I could literally give you another hour and a half of just this kind of evidence alone. Those circles are even on the cloth here again. The reason I wanted to point that out is because, look, here's fossilized dinosaur skin. Circles. Because they probably actually saw them. And they're more accurate than what we are getting in our museums today. St. Andrew's Hall here, there are these pillars outside that church, and it looks just like a baby T-Rex. I could go to almost every century. All around the world, we see evidence that dinosaurs have lived with people. Everywhere. I don't know if I have any more out there, but that book, Dire Dragons, by Vance Nelson, will give you all kinds of stuff like this. But we're pretty much out of time, and it's everywhere, even fire-breathing ones. Okay? This is called the fire salamander from this, I'll do this real quick. This castle, this is one of the kings in there. This is from the 1500s. Every one of them had kind of their own emblem, and his was what they call the fire salamander. Notice it has scales, and it blows fire, and it's off of the ground. This is a fire salamander today. What they drew is not a fire salamander. It doesn't have the scales, but yet we have different types of dinosaurs engraved in that castle, some having the scales, different types of scales that we see. And there are over, I think, 600 or 800 depictions of dragons, which would be dinosaurs, in that castle. They're everywhere, and it matches what we see in fossils. So, like I said, it is literally everywhere. You go to a Chinese restaurant and you can see that the placemat that they have, they've got an animal for every month of the year, and those poor Chinese could only think of 11 animals. And then the 12th one, well, we just got to make up the dragon. Right? No. Even that tells you, guys, they knew it. Marco Polo recorded in his journals that the Chinese emperor raised dragons to pull their chariots in parades. Alexander the Great put in his journals that in 326 BC, his men killed one in a cave. We can see things from Ontario, Lake Superior, the Grand Canyon. In the Grand Canyon, Indian art. So with that, I might try and squeeze just a couple more in on the next presentation, but I want to be respectful to the time. So I'm going to kind of call that quits for this. But I didn't know how far I was going to get through. But like I said, it's everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Dinosaurs did indeed live with people. And so with that in mind, that's exactly what the Scriptures would say. And so therefore, we should always trust the Bible. All right. I'll close there. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We'll take a short break and be back to hear from Dr. Horton about toxic tales and faith-stealing stories. So, see you back in about 15. All right, we're ready to get started here, folks. If you want to come on in and take your seats. Dr. Horton's going to tell us some toxic tales and some faith-stealing stories. So, Kevin?
Okay, thank you very much. And here we are, making it to the end, huh? Okay. I think I am going to continue sitting down so that I survive to the end. That'll make my wife and family a little happier. I can drive back tomorrow or Sunday. Yeah, tomorrow afternoon. All right, so what we're going to do now, and we're going to see, there's going to be some similarities to some of the things you've heard. Well, I'm going to put it together in just looking through Genesis, the order of creation, and I'll take little caveats away to deal with areas which we're being taught wrong things. And I'm going to hit them briefly, like many of our speakers up to this point have hit them in much more detail. I'm going to hit them briefly just so we could get the idea of where we are being lied to, and it's affecting our spiritual health. So as we look into Genesis chapter 1, we are looking at the days of creation. And a reminder, in Genesis 1:1, we saw the origin of the heavens, which I would call space, and the earth, and time began. Remember that. And then in Genesis 2, we saw that the earth was first formless and void, and there was darkness over the surface of the deep, and then the Spirit of God was hovering, or the Hebrew word implies almost a vibrating effect over the waters. Now think about the earth in this form. It's just matter, and very likely mostly water. And what is it doing? Well, I think it is starting the earth, forming it in structure, maybe even in composition, and starting it to rotate as the Spirit is transforming it from that to that. So we see it transforming the earth from a mass of matter down into what we have as our globe today. And then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now we have, in verse 3, we have an origin, in verses 1 through 3, we have an origin of time, which begins when God creates space and matter, and now He energizes the universe. But what's the source of the light? Because the sun, moon, and stars are created when? Day 4. And the answer is clear in Scripture. We don't know for certain. It's clear that. But I just offer this in Revelation 21. In the new heavens and the new earth, the city has no need for the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. And remember, we saw that the Word of God in Hebrews chapter 10, I'm thinking it was the faith chapter 11, is by faith we understand that the Word of God created. Well, the Word of God is Christ, so the Word of God is illuminating the universe at this early stage. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from darkness. Now, what does that mean? Separated the light from darkness. Well, if the Spirit of God is hovering over the earth, forming the earth, and if it puts the earth in motion, now what do we have? We have remember our view. Let me back up a little bit. In verse 2, it said the earth was formless and void. Do you remember Yoda says? You remember that? Where a noun is put in front of the verb, that's called fronting, and that becomes the topic. Well, in verse 2, verse 1, it was time. Verse 2, another fronting occurs where the earth is now the topic. All right, so now he's speaking of separating the light from darkness relative to the earth. Okay, how do we separate light from darkness on the earth? Oops. We see rotation. rotation. I believe that that's when God put the earth into rotation. We have a source of light now. He's separating earth from darkness. Once that happens, we now have a clock because we have a rotation time, 24 hours. We now have a clock to measure time. How much time happened before this? Does it matter? No. But time, whatever amount of time, could have been minutes to hours to days to years. Doesn't really matter at that point. But now we have a clock. He separated light from darkness, and then he tells us it was a 24-hour period, and there was evening and morning the first day. Now, many of you have heard this argument that, well, what God, when he's speaking of day, he's speaking of long ages. Because a day to God is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years a day. So it may mean long ages. I'll deal with that tomorrow, okay? So we'll hit it a little more. But the point here is that a possibility? Well, the Hebrew word yom, or yom, for day, can be used that way, by the way, just like we use day. For instance, in the Hebrew word yom, it's whenever it's a long period of time, it's always singular. In other words, it's back in the day. You wouldn't say back in the days, you could, but in Hebrew, it always was singular, never with a number, and of course the context will help to drive you on that. In a single day, it may be plural. But that's in the Hebrew, it may be plural, often with a number, and it's context driven. So let's think about a day as a period of time, all right? And how we would use it. It's the same way in the Hebrew in this sense, in that back in Abraham's day. Does that mean a 24-hour period? No, it's a long period of time. Now, let me interrupt that with a thought of back in Abraham's third day. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that when he was 3 days old, then it was a 24-hour period. Do you see what happens when you put a number in front of it? The number demands that it be a 24-hour period. You see that? So we think about day 1, day 2, day 3. It has to be a 24-hour period. Doesn't make sense. Now, of course, the other statement is, it goes back to 2 Peter chapter 3. Do not overlook this fact, beloved, that with the Lord, 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. All right, that's often quoted. Now, what is that saying? God is outside of time. All right? The context is so interesting, the context of this, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow morning. The context of Peter is refuting those who do not believe in Noah's flood. That's in the future, in the last days, which are the ones who want the days to be millions of years. Isn't that interesting? They're quoting this, but Peter is actually is refuting the arguments that they're concerned of, that this future group will want to get rid of Noah's flood. But don't worry, Jesus is coming back because God is not waiting. He's waiting till the last person comes, basically. That is not a good argument. It's out of context for it to be a long period of time. Now, also we know that as a 24-hour period, whenever you put a number in front of it, it always is a single 24-hour day. So in 1 day or 7 days, and in this case, 7 days are given. That's pretty good indication it's 1 week when there's given 7 days. And the context is evening and morning. You can't get more specific. Just think about it. If I was trying to send you a letter and tell you about a 24-hour period, and I said first day, second day, third day, fourth day, but I thought, well, maybe you'll get confused about that, thinking it's a longer period of time. Could I be more specific than to say there was evening and morning? Basically, what I'm saying is there's a rotation of the earth 24 hours. I'm being as specific as you can be, and that is what I think the Lord is, being very specific. So you're going to have to decide what you're going to do with this, but I'm going to argue very strongly that's a 24-hour period, and I think most of you understand that. So on the first day, what do we see? We see the rotation of the earth. The Earth is formed from amorphous mass into a shape, and then it is rotated, and now we have a 24-hour period, and we can measure it as a clock. Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. What is this expanse? What is your idea? Any thoughts? Sky. Could be the sky. In which case it would be the atmosphere, correct? He's putting the atmosphere to the earth, but what are the waters above the expanse? Let's look at this again. We have an expanse between waters. Now, I suppose if we want to think of this as the clouds up there up in the atmosphere, but that doesn't really fit because the expanse is between the waters. In other words, the atmosphere would have to end, where then the water would be above it. Doesn't really fit. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. So we have waters, then we have expanse, and then we have waters, and here we go, and God called the expanse heaven. Heaven. Now remember, there's three possibilities of heaven, right? One is the abode of the birds, one is the abode of the stars, and one is the throne room of God. Well, the latter is not into question here. So we're either dealing with the abode of birds, which is atmosphere, or we're dealing with stellar space. Okay, before there were stars. I am convinced contextually that the word heaven, shamayim here, is going to be used as the same place where the stars are going to be placed. So I think it is heaven. So I think the outer space is being now expanded. Expanse is a Hebrew word, implies an expanding space, and I think he's developing the abode of the stars without the stars. So I think God is preparing space. Now, stop there for a minute. Didn't you say there was waters above the expanse? So that would put into our model a massive amount of matter at the outer rim of space. All around outer space that's expanding out. We don't know that's true, except it seems to be what the text is saying here. That is rather radical. Now, the early, one of the fathers of creation movement was Henry Morris, and he thought it was a water vapor canopy above the earth. And how many of you have heard of the canopy theory by Morris? Yeah. And the trouble with that theory is that canopy would be very effective and it would cook us, so that life wouldn't even be possible. And now that we've done the calculations on that view. And so his thought was that the water up there precipitated and brought about Noah's flood. I think we have better views on that now, but that was an early thought. From the Hebrew, I think this is space. He's preparing space. Now, let's apply this. The Big Bang model is of an expanding space into a hyperspace. There's no matter out there at the outer rim, and this is the way they view it. It's kind of a cone that is expanding out. But if we put this together, and of course the earth is greatly exaggerated here, we have the earth in the center, and we have a water layer on the outer rim of space as it's expanding. So there's no stars in this expanse, but there's waters on the outer edge. That becomes significant as a possibility to explain the time-space issue, well, how we can see starlight that's millions of light years away. We'll come back to that later. So I believe in day number 2, God is developing outer space as a place for the stars and putting water out at the outer edges of the universe. By the way, that's how the Jews interpreted this. And even my friend who is part of the board of IBA, and she goes to a Messianic group, which is Messianic Jews who believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and she studies the Hebrew a lot. She's learned that the Hebrews, the original Hebrews, saw this as water in the outer space that made up very distant ends of the universe. That's how the Jews interpreted that. So that's day 2. All right? Day 3. And I put the NIV here just for intention. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered in one place. But that's actually the same word, shamayim, so they've interpreted it. ESV puts it better. Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place. So that'd be down on Earth's surface, be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear, and it was so. So on the 3rd day, God is creating a dry land place for vegetation. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation. All right, so now we have plant life being developed. Stop. Here's toxic tale number 2, the fact of evolution. Because that's, evolution says, no, the plant life just built itself out of existing matter and it came into existence. Here's a bust that was in England, put out by the Humanist Society of England, of London, and notice the wording on it. There's probably no God. Stop worrying and enjoy life. Unpack that for a second. Think about it. Number 1, probably. That's interesting. That's problematic, if you ask me. But what they're saying is, I don't think so. Why? Well, what does that do then? What are they saying? You don't have to worry about judgment. So do what you want to do. Do you see what they're really admitting? Their motivation is what? Sin. Sin. Their and I'll show you tomorrow that it's very specific sin. Sex. Okay, I'll show you that. They want to have that. They want to have freedom to do what they want, and they don't want God stepping on their freedom. That's bottom line. Here's one of those, Sir Julian Huxley. By the way, he's the grandson of Thomas Huxley. He was an atheist of the humanist group, and his brother was a writer, Aldous Huxley. And Aldous Huxley, I'm going to quote tomorrow in the sermon. But let's look at what his brother said, Sir Julian Huxley. And by the way, the sins of the grandfathers are roosting in the grandchildren. The first point about Darwin's theory is that it's no longer a theory, it's a fact. We've been here, right? We've seen this. It's fact. No serious scientist would deny the fact that evolution has occurred. The fact. That's wrong terminology. What is that? That's indoctrination terminology. That's not science, okay? No serious scientist would deny the fact that evolution has occurred, just as he would not deny the fact that the sun goes around, or the earth goes around the sun. All right? That was his statement in evolution, the issues of evolution, back in 1960. Richard Dawkins plagiarized him. Richard Dawkins says the same thing, and he uses almost the same words. Today, the theory of evolution is about as much open to doubt as the theory that the earth goes around the sun. Richard Dawkins, our famous contemporary atheist. So again, the question we want to deal with is it intellectual suicide to be a man or woman who believes in the Creator in the age of science? Now remember, we've been taught this, right? That monkeys, and actually we've evolved way back. But what if we go backwards and just look backwards to what the implication is here? The implication backwards is we go back to a what? A single cell. A single cell. Now we've talked about this, but I'm just going to go through this in a brief way so maybe it can crystallize in your mind in a way that you can not have to be a serious scientist and be able to see right through this, okay? So let me help you do that. What do we need for life? The basics of life. We need structure and information. Now you've heard that, right? As we've been talking along. Think about it just this way. Think about this computer. What does it need? We need the hardware and the software. What is the hardware? Structure. The mechanical, physical structure. And then what's the software? That's the programming that goes into it. The cell needs the same thing. So we have structure in terms of the cell structure, and we have information that's coded in the DNA. And that all has to come into existence without intelligence. All right? It has to come into existence by the natural properties of matter. So let's look at each of these individually. We're going to look at information, and then we're going to look at structure and the origin, and in a way that I think will help you be able to explain this to anybody on the street, why you don't believe in evolution. All right? Look at these two discs. How many of you recognize the one with the box next to it? And how many of you recognize that? That's the way, by the way, for you youngins, that's the way we used to get Windows upgrades. Microsoft Windows, and they come in this little box, and they sell you this cute little box for $199, and then there'd be a disk or two, and you put that in your computer and you load the operating system. Nowadays, what do? We just go online, right? We pay the money and go online. Well, this was also a disk. I could buy that one for 35 cents. What's the difference between this disk and this disk? One's loaded with information, isn't it? Very carefully designed information. At the early stages, there was about 3 gigabytes of information on those disks. That one, this next one, had none. So that one was 35 cents. So why was this one $1.99 and the other one was 35 cents? 199 versus 35 cents, it's for the information. All right? So for life to begin, we also need information, and in the DNA, there's over 1.5 gigabits of information in there, gigabits of information, all right? That is a lot of information. So here's the question, where did the information come from? In both cases, all right? In the one case, we know it was a bunch of these guys, right? Very intelligent men and women programming for hours and hours and hours, troubleshooting, programming. That's how it developed. How did it happen according to evolution in the DNA? There you go. There's your creator. Nothing. So what we have is design without a designer. Blueprints on how to make the cell, how to function the cell without blueprints that basically drew themselves. An operating system that's complex, that just spontaneously arose from nothing. Do you see how absurd that is? That's absurd. That's absurd. Information must have intelligent information in it. It has to be self-originating for this to happen, and it must invent a language to communicate that information. Did you catch that? In other words, if I gave you a book, my book, and it was written in Swahili, what good would it do you? I don't know if is there somebody here who reads Swahili? Okay, so maybe, but the rest of us, it would be worthless. So we'll have to pick another language, but you get the point. It has to be in a language that something can read it. And your cell, by the way, can read it. Isn't that interesting? So the language is readable and is able to be put into action. So it must develop a recipient that can read that language and put it into action. All with no intelligence. Now, I think that's almost enough right there, isn't it? All right? The basic needs of life is we need information, and that ends it right there. There's no way that's going to happen by itself. It is actually foolishness to do that, to think that. It's almost foolish to say that I walked in and I found this computer running, and electricity's running it, and it's up and working, to think, wow, how many years of just random tornadoes came through and made this and gave it the information and loaded the operating system and put it all together. That's silliness. And that's what we're told happened to life, which is far more complex than this computer. All right, the second thing we need is structure. And we need structure with a function. Now, this is a picture I took of Chicago when I was at Moody, and I was up on top of the roof, and I took that picture one night, and I was thinking about that city and thinking, what do you need for a city to operate? Well, you need to have power systems and transportation systems, and you'd have to have delivery boys to deliver stuff and girls or whatever. You have to have garbage disposal. You have to have manufacturing plants. You have to have energy systems, all to make that city work. And it's all planned in and designed. The cell has that on a microscopic level. If we just take a look at this, what I call the library, which would be the nucleus, that is where all the information to run the cell is encoded in the nucleus. And it's like a book in the days when you had that section of the library that you couldn't take the books out. What was that called? What was it? Oh, okay. Well, it's that area where you couldn't take the books out of the library. You could only look at them there. These were very rare and special books. Well, the DNA is that way. It's not allowed to leave the library, and so it has to be copied. And so you have a photocopy system called RNA. You've heard this, but think of it this way. You have to have all that in place, and you have to have a lot more, this is simplified, to make that to be able to happen. The photocopies then move out to the manufacturing floor, which is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, because on there are the things called ribosomes, and those ribosomes are the factory. The endoplasmic reticulum is part of the trucking system to move the products out to where they are supposed to go. By the way, those products are given a barcode, a chemical barcode that is read, and a zip line to get them to the right place. And when they hit the right place, there's another barcode, another thing that reads the barcode. Oh, this is the right place, then it dumps its load. That all has to happen by itself without anybody thinking. And then you have to have the cell membrane, which keeps things safe inside so the environment can be kept from things that will damage it. You need a garbage disposal system called the lysosome to get out the waste products. And then you need a power system. All of that has to be in place. Now they will say, well, wait a minute. You're using eukaryotic cells with all these structures. The prokaryotic cells, which are bacteria, don't have all these structures in it, so you're in error. No, all these structures are inside, but they're scattered in the prokaryote. Everything that has to be done in this cell has to happen in all, even the most simple bacteria. So here's the leap of faith that we're being asked when we believe in evolution. We're being asked to believe that the hardware and the software all came into existence by itself, no intelligence. So in this case, the cell structure is analogous to the motherboard, and the information here is analogous to the DNA information, and that all happened by chance. Is that foolishness or what? That's total foolishness. So the toxic tale number 2 is the fact of evolution. It has to be, information has to develop without an intelligent source. That is scientific foolishness. And so that's not true, and structure has to develop without a designer. That is unscientific foolishness. So you can just dispose of it, and you can use this argument of a computer with anybody that you know. You get people that they say, oh, how can you be so foolish to believe that God, we don't need a God anymore because we know evolution. I say, really, what part of the cell origin of life do you know for sure? You mean you think that information, 1.5 gigabytes of information made itself by itself, and it's in a language that can be read and put into action. And you think that happened. And the structure to all support all that, which is like the effects of a big city, that all happened by accident. No designer. I don't believe you. I think that's foolishness. And yet it is toxic to our students because it's taught as fact by Sir Julian Huxley and everybody who follows him. The fact of evolution. And there was evening and morning the third day, and so now we have dry land and plants on the third day. On the fourth day, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky. So you see that? So that's that expanse. So that is outer space. You see that as an expanding space. Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky, and that's the NIV. I shouldn't have changed that because it really is expanse of the, what's the word? I've just lost it. Been doing this too long. My brain. Shamayim is the heavens, the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night. And God made two lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser night to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky or of the heavens to give light on the earth. So we have the sun and the moon created, and then the stars, and there was evening and morning the fourth day. And so that's what's made on the fourth day. And you want to say, stop, hold on a minute. Wait a minute. Distant starlight disproves the Bible. How many thought about this? Well, there's stars out there that are millions of light years away. In other words, it takes millions of years for their light to get to Earth. And if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, how in the world can we see their light? Great argument. Great argument. Starlight in time. If the Earth is 65 to even 8,000, I won't say that anymore, but years old, how could light reach us from stars millions of light years away? And I'm going to refer you to this work by D. Russell Humphreys. You can look him up, and you can watch some of his YouTubes if you're interested in more detail. And I also write it in my book. I put a chapter in there that explains this in more detail than we're going to do now. D. Russell Humphreys is his name, and Starlight in Time. So you can look that up. And there's videos out there on YouTube. You can watch them. They're pretty good. Now, what I want you to think about, number one, how far have we sent our spacecraft? Oh, they've gone farther than that. Do you know that they've gone past past Pluto? How big is that compared to our galaxy? Nothing. And then we're talking about galaxy among many other galaxies and many galaxies, miles and miles and miles that we haven't even touched. And we want to say we know that this proves God's not real. We don't know anything out there, okay? We even know less how time worked in the early formation of the universe when it's expanding. We know nothing about this. I want to give you an example, was the Pioneer anomaly. The Pioneer was set into space many years ago, and it finally reached the outer ends of our solar system. And it's sending back information to Earth, and we're picking it up, and it's just going farther out, and all of a sudden, it's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Something that's not supposed to be there. It was supposed to be here, and it's over there. It's called the Pioneer anomaly. And there's been all sorts of attempts to try and mathematically figure it out. You know what the truth is? We don't have a clue what happened. What does that tell you? We know nothing about time and space out there. We know nothing. So I say distant starlight, that's silliness, and I'll show you how to detoxify this in your own mind. Remember this, I showed you two different models. You need to understand how we're observing the universe, because it goes into all these formulas and most of us don't get it. But the Big Bang model is based upon atheistic presuppositions. Did you catch that? In this model, matter is the creator of everything. In the Big Bang model, it creates itself and then expands out into hyperspace, and it's matter doing everything, and it all is designed around to make their formulas work within their presupposition. Do you understand that? This will be enough for you. So why are we surprised that an atheistic model contradicts the Bible? Do you get that? So the atheistic model, how light and time works out in outer space, contradicts the Bible. Surprise, surprise. Now, if we start with the Bible, and it starts in a different place, and C. Russell Humphreys does this model, he actually shows how time will slow down by gravity, and if the Earth is near the center of the general gravital mass of the universe, then time will go much faster in outer space. I mean, we're talking about millions of years in seconds on Earth. And he does all the formulas if you really want to get into it. I'm not going to do it. I've done it. I have done it, and it gets everybody glassy-eyed when I get done. So, and even me, I get glassy-eyed. So you see, the Bible starts in a different place where God created. In this biblical view, the biblical view, the answer is solvable, and that's what Humphreys shows you. At least one way it's solvable, which tells us then that the issue is not that starlight in time contradicts the Bible, it is the basic presupposition of the Big Bang Theory contradicts the Bible. And if you start with the Bible, you can solve it. It may not be correct, but you know that it's solvable, which means the Bible has good reasons to be believed in. So toxic tale number 5 can be detoxified when we start with the biblical model. And that's how we do that. Day number what? 5. God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. Now here's an expanse of the heavens down on earth. So it can be used both ways. So we can't be certain on all of this. But I think we can make a good case that we're right so far. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves on the earth, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, every winged bird according to its kind. Stop here again. Now, wait a minute. Speciation, how all the species expand on the earth, that is strong evidence of the authenticity of evolution. All right, speciation as we're taught. How all the animal species formed on the earth. Notice how this is beginning from one kind of single-celled animal up to all the more complex forms of life. And you know the story of Darwin as he rode on the Beagle, the HMS Beagle, and they landed on the Galapagos Islands, and he drew these pictures of the beaks. You know the story? And what he observed is that environmental pressures resulted in a change in beaks, and so that they could survive under different environments. So, for instance, when the small seeds were available, the small beaks were preferable. And so those birds flourished. But then when the weather was different and only the large seeds were available, then they needed the bigger beaks, and they changed. And so what Darwin and his group has realized, that the environmental pressures resulted in a change in the DNA code leading to a new species. I want you to catch that. Leading to changes in DNA code. Now, of course, the classic biology books will show that, and they'll also show this. You remember this one? The peppered moths of London. You remember there's white and black versions of the moths, and with the, the industrialization of London, smoke filled the air and killed off the lichen on the rocks. Now, if you notice, they're on this side, you can see that guy, can't you? Do you see this one? He's there. Do you see how the color really codes him in? But this color makes him target to birds, and he'd be gone. But when the lichen died off, look what you have. The white guy's dead, and the black guy fills in. And so his point is this, that pressures in the environment result in changes in the DNA code leading to a new species. And so he surmised that these changes will then be what led to all the different species. Now, we've all been taught that, right? What's the problem? That's not reality. Reality is not this at all. Reality is, see, we know this. We know this. We've been lied to, folks. This is reality. They move back and forth. When the seasons change, the beaks change back. We started with finches, and what did we end up with? Finches. We had different sized beaks. And what happened is when the environmental pressures came on, guess what? Something sensed that within the bird and sent a signal to its DNA. It rotated the DNA, and we got a new, different gene that's already in place, and the offspring immediately change to the different sized beak to fit the environment. And then when the environment changes back, there's some kind of sensors within the bird that recognize this, send connections to their DNA in their gametes or in their sexual reproducing cells, and it rotates the gene back and they change the beak. They're just going back and forth with existing information. That's all it is. All he observed was that. And the same thing happens with the peppered moths. We started with what? Peppered moths. We ended with peppered moths. And you know what? They can change back and forth. That's called epigenetics, the rotation of the molecule. It's already pre-existing information. Randy Galusa really did a great job on this because he's an engineer and an MD. And he said, this is engineering design. There's sensors out there that pick up environmental changes. There's routes to make that information go down to the reproductive organs, and they change for the offspring, and it's just a rotation of the genes, and it's gene expression only. And then the genes rotate back. It's already programmed in. And so, pressures in the environment result in DNA change? No! They lead to changes in expression in the existing DNA code. A new species is still a finch, even if they get separated and they lose some of the DNA information to go back, and they become kind of a new species. They started out as a finch and they ended up as a finch. They might be a little different finch color and they don't go back and don't breed back. That's all we have. We still have peppered moths. They change in back and forth. And so the speciation is silliness. Detoxification, Darwin observed engineering design. He actually observed the great work of the great engineer, our God. So it's not toxic. Epigenetics confirms the biblical creation model and explains that how kinds move to different species. And there was evening and morning, the fifth day. And on the sixth day, God says, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock. Now I want you to notice how God groups the animals. He groups them as they relate to humanity. What are livestock versus wild animals? They're animals that can live in close proximity to humans. I'll give you an example, even though it's not perfect. I got to be known as the bobcat veterinarian of the Pacific Northwest. And that was because nobody else would do it. and sometimes ethically they didn't want to do it. Whatever the reason was, I'd have bobcat owners come from all over the Pacific Northwest, and they would bring them to me in cages, the dog transformation cages, and I would anesthetize them, and then I would take off their front claws and their fangs so that the owners wouldn't be killed, basically. I did that all the time. Whatever you think about that, that's what I did. Now, I have to tell you this, just a sideline. This is just a fun little moment, is how do you anesthetize a bobcat? You don't just pick it up and give it a shot. So, and I didn't want to touch those things. So I developed, I had a threaded rod that was just the right size that I could twist a syringe the rubber part of the syringe plunger on, and I'd take it off the plastic plunger and put it on that. And then I'd put the syringe on that and suck up some anesthesia. Then my technician would get in front of the bobcat going like this, and the bobcat would go like this back, and I'd hit him in the back end. And they're so fast that they would swing around and knock that thing and break that off when I'd only get about 1/4 of a cc into them. And then we'd repeat the model and repeat it until the cat's finally asleep, and that's how we got them out. Some animals don't do well with people, okay? They're crazy, they're nuts, they're wild. And you could always tell a bobcat owner if they rolled up their sleeves, okay? They're ripped up. Why would you have those things? I don't know, but, and why did I do that? I don't know. Okay, so according to their kinds, we have livestock, and those animals can live in proximity to humanity. And then there's creatures that move along the ground. So this would be another class of animals, like salamanders, bugs, everything else. And then finally we have the wild animals. And the wild animals have to include the dinosaurs. And we've seen this, that's something we're going to talk about in just a second, just briefly. And then God says, let us make man in our image. And all of that happens on day 6. Now, of course, there's a stopping point. You mean dinosaurs were with people? And of course, we would call that toxic tale number 7. Dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. We've dealt with that. But I got to show you this because Brian talked a little bit about the dinosaur soft tissue. Mary Schweitzer was I have to tell you this story because it's sad and interesting. Mary Schweitzer was a high school, she was a teacher. I'm not sure if it was high school or elementary in rural Montana. And she was interested in paleontology, and she eventually went back to school at Montana State University. Jack Horner, who, by the way, in Jurassic Park, you know, the head guy who has the hat, that character was developed about Jack Horner in Montana. And Jack Horner was there, and Jack, she hears about him, and she goes up to Jack after a lecture that she went to see and said, "Hi, Jack, I'm Mary, and I'm a creationist, and you're wrong." And Jack says to her, "Hi, Mary, I'm an atheist, and you can come in my classes and see if I'm wrong." Over the course of the year or two that she was under Jack and pursuing her PhD, she changed her view from creationism to ancient earth Christian. In the process, don't know if it was all that, but she loses her marriage in the process too, because they were both going to a very conservative Bible teaching church there in Bozeman. And anyways, long and short of it is, because of her relationship with Jack, she ends up in Raleigh, North Carolina as a PhD who works on the bones of dinosaurs. And there was a T-Rex that was discovered out in central Montana in a very remote location. And they got the fur from this thing, which was heavy. It was solid rock, but it was a remote area. They couldn't even get a car in there, a truck in there. And so they brought in a helicopter, and the helicopter couldn't lift it. So they had to cut it in half. I imagine they used rock saws of some sort. Cut it in half, and chips broke off. And they sent those to Mary. And Mary tells the story. Now, isn't it interesting? The person who left creationism because of the evidence of science is the one who's going to find the evidence that is most persuasive that Noah's flood occurred. But let's go on. She gets this box of chips, which you can rarely get. This is actual dinosaur fossil chips. And she wanted to get it so she could look at it under the microscope. She had to dissolve some of the rock away with acid. Watch what happens. This is 60 minutes. Let's see if this is going to work.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science. That organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million. Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid...
Let's put this under the scope here.
Well, look. Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel.
You're
You
kidding.
see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time. I can't help it. I mean, 80 million years old.
Mary published her new results last year, and while some of her critics have been swayed, the controversy still rages, and the stakes are high. If blood vessels can survive 80 million years, what about DNA?
Well, isn't that interesting? That was 2005, by the way. And since then, she has published many more findings, and it's exploding out there. People are starting to look. Well, they never looked before. Why? It's impossible. 68 million years old. Now, this is the greatest discovery of the 21st century. Greatest dinosaur discovery of the 21st century, and she didn't want to tell anybody. What in the world? You're the great. This is, well, why? Because it was impossible. Because everything we know, these are quotes, we know about tissue deterioration says that soft tissue cannot last even 1 million years. And that's been confirmed and confirmed and confirmed. It is not possible. It is impossible unless the fossils are only thousands of years old. Mary discovered the greatest evidence of Noah's flood. And I think that is God's way of just being a little bit, Mary, you've left your Bible behind, and look at, you're going to be the one to prove it to be correct. It's kind of interesting. Now, Jack, you saw Jack. Jack was her boss. Jack is Jack Horner. He worked on the Museum of the Rockies, which we've seen some. And here we go. Are there dinosaurs living today? And yes, birds are living dinosaurs. And so we got to watch this just because you got to watch it, okay? Let's see if it's going to work.
Skeptical that the full dinosaur DNA sequence will ever be found. But that hasn't stopped him. He's come up with a whole new idea for his dream of making a dinosaur.
The best way is just to use a modern dinosaur, the chicken.
Modern
because
dinosaurs.
evolution works, birds are actually carrying ancestral DNA.
Horner has written a book proposing a plan to mine that ancestral DNA as a way to reverse engineer a chicken into what he calls a dino chicken. It may seem improbable that this is carrying DNA from something like this. But when you think about it, birds, like the dinosaurs they evolved from, still walk on hind legs. Most have 3 toes pointing forward with 1 in the back, and they even all have wishbones. As for dinosaur features you don't see in modern chickens, like long tails, Horner's contention is they can be brought back, since you can still see them in embryos as little chicks grow.
As the chicken embryo develops, it does develop a fairly long tail before a gene kicks on and destroys it. So if we can stop that gene, we theoretically can get a chicken to hatch out with a relatively long tail.
So you're not saying actually change the gene.
Just switching a gene on or switching a gene off.
He says picture a chicken with a long tail, teeth, and little claw-like hands instead of wings. So maybe there will be a dino chicken.
I'm sure there'll be a dino chicken.
You're sure there'll be a dino chicken?
I think we'll be able to make a dino chicken within the next 5 years.
Boy, I see a new movie coming out of this.
This time I could get eaten.
That was in 2005. Dino chicken in 5 years. That's just silliness. By the way, a gene doesn't kick on and turn that off. That's just muscle development in the growing embryo. It's the same Haeckel argument that we saw before. So then, Brian already dealt with birds evolving from dinosaurs. Therefore, they originated after dinosaurs. But birds we see are on day 5, and dinosaurs are on day 6. So you're going to have to decide who made the mistake. Is it men who made the mistake and we got it wrong, or is it God who got it wrong? And I'm going to say I don't think it was God who got it wrong. I taught this, remember I told you I taught some of this to some kids at Lewistown, 4th graders, and they had a slip and slide at this camp where it was coming down the side of the hill, and they put water on it and the kids would slide down it. And I went down it once and went, okay, I'm too old for this. But they had great fun. And one kid was getting ready to run, and he runs out, jumps on that slip and slide. He's going down, and he says, I don't believe in dino chickens. So, all right, I got through to one, okay? Sorry, I don't believe in dino chickens. God got it right. God made the birds first and then the dinosaurs. And that is the end of Toxic Tales, but it also wanted you to see they're good answers to all the steps of God's creation in day 1 through 6 in the creation week. And that's the point of this, to pull it all together and see all of these toxic tales that are being taught to us are really not true. Not true. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll take a break for quick dinner, and you'll be on your own. We do have some questionnaires in your welcome package in your bags. If you'd take a few minutes, fill those out, let us know what your opinion is of the conference we've presented this weekend and yet to come. So if you take a few minutes, leave those at the desk up front. We'd appreciate it. So we'll see you back here at 6:30. Brian will be talking about after the flood.